Rongcheng University, the freshman convocation ceremony. Vivian Marsh was on stage to deliver a speech as the outstanding new student representative, dressed in a crisp white shirt, holding her script. Below her was a sea of faces, but her gaze swept past them, looking expectantly toward the entrance. A few days ago, she had messaged Julian Forster to mention her upcoming speech. "I got into Rongcheng University, Uncle Julian. On the first day of school, I'll be giving a speech as the freshman representative. A lot of parents will be there. Can you come?" 3 months had passed since that incident. She didn't know if it was her imagination, but she felt that ever since that day, Julian Forster had been avoiding her. He wouldn't answer her calls or reply to her texts. Now, it seemed he had completely forgot even this most important milestone in her life. The ceremony began, and there was still no sign of him. Vivian lowered her lashes, forcefully suppressing the wave of disappointment in her heart. She forced herself to calm down and began her speech in earnest. Before long, however, a familiar figure walked in. The man was dressed in an expensive, impeccably tailored suit, looking as if he had just come from the office. An assistant followed behind him. Even from such a distance, Vivian could feel that familiar, imposing coldness. He was here. Watching that tall, elegant figure, Vivian's hand, clutching the speech, involuntarily tightened. Her gaze traveled over the crowd and fixed on him, unmoving. Ever since she was 8 years old, no matter how many people were around, her eyes could only ever see him. That year, both her parents had passed away, leaving her with only her grandmother. She had gone to school alone with a tattered book bag to file for withdrawal. With no money and no energy, she didn't want to study anymore. It was on that day that she met Julian Forster. Back then, he was young and in his prime, having just taken over the Forster Group. He had donated an entire building to the school in the name of the Forster Group's charitable foundation. It was this man, a figure so important that even the principal fawned over him, who had singled her out from a crowd of impoverished students. He had walked slowly toward her, his leather shoes clicking on the ground. A single look that changed everything. After learning about her situation, he knelt before her and tore up the withdrawal form in her hand. "Don't quit. I can support you." From then on, a person with no one to depend on finally had a pillar of support. When she had to drop out for lack of money, he sponsored her education. When her classmates mocked her as a jinx, he canceled a meeting with 100 people to come and stand up for her. When she was repeatedly ridiculed for not having parents, he flew back from abroad in the middle of the night to attend her parent-teacher conference as her family. He had appeared in Vivian Marsh's barren world like a god, bestowing upon her infinite warmth. When the speech ended, Vivian couldn't wait to get off the stage, but she found that he was no longer in the audience. She searched and searched, eventually making her way outside the auditorium. Julian Forster was standing in the hallway, and opposite him stood a woman. Vivian recognized her at once. The most famous beauty at Rongcheng University, the teacher Sylvia Vance. As soon as she had started at the university, she had heard countless male students discussing how young and beautiful this teacher was, and how they absolutely had to take her class. At that moment, the usually indifferent man's voice was slightly hoarse. "Sylvia, I came here specifically to see you." A few meters away, Vivian froze. So he hadn't come for her today? A bitter taste filled Vivian's heart. Before she could even process it, she heard Julian's cold voice ring out. "Who's there?" Vivian's heart tightened, and she had no choice but to walk out with her head down. They hadn't seen each other since the incident 3 months ago. Now, suddenly reunited, she didn't dare to look at him, only able to stare at her shoes as she greeted him. Uncle Julian. Seeing her, Julian probably also remembered that night, and his pupils contracted slightly. But a few seconds later, he regained his composure. "What are you doing out here instead of attending the convocation ceremony?" Just as Vivian was about to explain, Julian's phone suddenly rang. He glanced at it, furrowed his brow, and walked a short distance away to answer it. Only Vivian and Sylvia were left in the hallway. Sylvia was the first to speak. "You are Julian's?" Vivian knew she must have misunderstood something and quickly explained. "Hello, Miss Vance. I'm a new freshman this year. My name is Vivian Marsh. I'm a student Mr. Forster has sponsored since I was young." Hearing the word "sponsored," Sylvia's gaze shifted, but she quickly returned to normal and let out a soft laugh. "Vivian Marsh, I remember that name. You were the provincial top scholar admitted to Rongcheng, weren't you? Rongcheng is already hard to get into, and you ranked first in the entire province. That's very impressive. Was getting into Rongcheng a task Julian gave you? Vivian quickly shook her head. No, I wanted to come here myself. Rongcheng is Uncle Julian's alma mater, so I wanted to see it too. For 3 years in high school, she had practically drowned herself in a sea of textbooks, not daring to slack off for a single second, all just to catch up to Julian Forster's footsteps. She had once seen a carefully preserved Rongcheng University student ID in Julian's study. She thought he must have a deep affection for his alma mater to have kept his student ID so perfectly. From that moment on, Vivian had been determined to get into Rongcheng University. But upon hearing this, a trace of surprise appeared in Sylvia's eyes. Julian told you his alma mater was Rongcheng, but he studied abroad. Rongcheng is my alma mater. Vivian's heart skipped a beat. She had never asked Julian where he went to university. She didn't have the right to ask. She had just seen how well he preserved that student ID and subconsciously assumed he had attended Rongcheng. But if it wasn't his, whose could it be? Vivian stood there stunned, the image of the blue student ID locked in the cabinet flashing in her mind. A Rongcheng University student ID, male students had red ones, while female students had blue ones. So, the student ID that Julian Forster cherished and preserved so carefully wasn't his, but a girl's. She looked at Sylvia Vance before her, and her mind went completely blank with a deafening buzz. By the time Julian Forster returned from his work call, Sylvia Vance had been called away by the department head. Ever since learning the truth, Vivian's mind had been in chaos. There were so many questions she wanted to ask, but none of them would come out. She was just a student he sponsored. What right did she have to meddle in his private life? Besides, after what happened 3 months ago, she still didn't know how he felt about it. Did he even remember? Vivian clenched her fists. Uncle Julian, 3 months ago you were drunk. Hearing her mention that date, Julian's expression changed again. He diverted the topic. I haven't gotten you a gift for getting into Rongcheng yet. What do you want? So, it wasn't her imagination after all. That incident, he had either forgotten it or was avoiding it. Vivian's eyes reddened slightly, and she followed his lead to the next topic. Can I have anything? Seeing the young girl's slightly red-rimmed eyes, his throat tightened. Yes. She gathered her courage and took a step closer to him. Uncle Julian, I want a hug. Julian was taken aback. Before he could answer, a hug carrying the fresh scent of a young woman was already upon him. Vivian's face was calm, but her racing heartbeat betrayed her nervousness. Julian didn't react for a moment. It wasn't until he saw the surprised look on Sylvia Vance's face as she walked over from a distance that he suddenly pushed the girl away. He looked at Vivian, his tone accusatory. Vivian Marsh, you're 18 now. Don't you know there's a difference between men and women? A pang of hurt shot through Vivian's heart. In the end, she just lowered her head and apologized. I'm sorry, Uncle Julian. I just wanted some encouragement. It won't happen again. Julian didn't spare her another glance. He walked straight toward Sylvia Vance, a hint of panic in his eyes. After that day, Vivian never saw Julian Forster again. To stop herself from thinking about him, Vivian could only throw herself entirely into her studies. She had no recreational activities. While others were out eating, drinking, and having fun, she was always studying. Vivian Marsh, do my part of the group project. In the study hall, Leo Forster tossed the newly assigned homework at Vivian. The young man was tall, roguish, and handsome. Since starting school, he had rejected countless confessions from girls, never giving them a second look, yet he always seemed to enjoy picking on Vivian. His friend next to him teased, Young Master Forster, it's been how many days since school started? You haven't even glanced at the campus belle who's pursuing you, yet you're always circling around this Vivian Marsh. What's going on? Don't tell me. Leo cut him off with a cold look. What nonsense are you talking about? She's a student my uncle sponsors. She took the money, so it's only right she does a few things for me. Hearing Leo's obviously mocking words, Vivian didn't get angry, nor did she retort. She just skillfully picked up the assignment sheet he had thrown at her and said softly, I'll get it done. Over 3 years of high school, she had lost count of how much homework she had done for Leo Forster. He was Julian Forster's nephew. Since they were young, he had always ordered her around with an air of complete entitlement. Even though she obediently took the assignment, Leo seemed dissatisfied with her perpetual attitude of ignoring him. His handsome face grew colder and colder, and it was a long while before he finally turned and left with his friend. Looking at the mountain of work on the assignment sheet, Vivian sighed and went back to her dorm. 3 days later, she went to give him the completed assignment, only to be told by his roommate that Leo had gone home. Vivian hesitated for a moment, then, with some unknown impulse, went to the Forster estate. At the Forster villa, Leo was playing a video game. Seeing her arrive, his body stiffened, and even his gaming became absent-minded. Yet his words were still sharp. "What are you doing here? Chasing me all the way to my house, just to turn in some stupid homework. I was afraid of losing it. It's safer to give it to you in person." In truth, she was trying her luck, hoping to see Julian Forster. After a pause, she scanned the empty living room. "Is Uncle Julian not home?" Leo's brow furrowed. He seemed displeased to hear her mention another man in front of him, even if that man was his own uncle. His tone was cold. "I don't know." Since the person she wanted to see wasn't there, Vivian had no reason to stay. She put down the homework and turned to leave. After walking out of the Forster villa, her spirits hit rock bottom. Suddenly, as if by some telepathic connection, she immediately turned back and sure enough saw Julian Forster, whom she hadn't seen for days, on the second floor. Except he was tenderly holding another person in his arms. That was Sylvia Vance. She froze on the spot, watching as they embraced for a full minute. Even from such a distance, she could still see the shy smile on Sylvia Vance's face. Vivian couldn't bear to watch any longer and fled as if escaping a disaster. From the very beginning, she had vaguely guessed that the relationship between Julian and Miss Vance was unusual. She had the answer in her heart, yet she still didn't dare to think about it, didn't dare to expose it. She ran wildly, ran back to her dorm, and curled up on her bed. She remembered that night, when he had held her just as tightly. Even though she knew that night was something that couldn't see the light of day, knew she had no standing to stop him from being close to Sylvia, her heart ached uncontrollably, and tears filled her eyes. After that, she didn't dare to go to the Forster estate so easily, much less see Julian. 2 months passed like this, and the heartache from seeing their embrace that day slowly began to fade. Vivian received her first scholarship since entering university. Julian had once promised her that as long as she won 5 scholarships, he would take her to a ball as his first female companion. Julian never brought a date to any event. The words "first female companion" held an immense allure for her, so she studied tirelessly every day. Including the 4 scholarships she had won in high school, this made a total of 5. But what happened 3 months ago, and then seeing him embrace Sylvia? She no longer knew if she could still ask him for this reward she had been dreaming of for 4 full years. Finally, after much deliberation, she mustered the courage to call him. It took 5 calls before he finally answered. "Uncle Julian, I got my 5th scholarship." Julian's cool voice came through the phone. "Congratulations. I can be your date now." On the other end, Julian seemed to fall silent for a moment. After a long while, he spoke. "I've been very busy lately. I don't have time for any balls." Vivian's heart sank instantly. As if sensing her disappointment, Julian fell silent again. For some reason, he spoke once more. "But there's a business reception next week. If you want to go, I can make time to attend." Vivian suddenly felt a light at the end of the tunnel and quickly agreed. "Thank you, Uncle Julian." A week later. On the day of the ball, Julian sent her a beautiful evening gown. In the evening, he had a driver pick her up and take her to the hotel. She changed into the beautiful, exquisite dress, feeling a daze like Cinderella stepping into her pumpkin carriage. However, when she walked into the ballroom and saw Sylvia Vance standing next to Julian, she froze completely. "Miss Vance!" Sylvia looked over the young, beautiful girl in front of her, then discreetly linked her arm with Julian's and smiled gently. "Vivi, you're here, just follow behind us. I'm Julian's date." It was as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over her, drenching her completely. As if sensing what she wanted to ask, Julian's expression was neutral as he explained calmly, "You've just turned 18. It's not appropriate for you to be my date. I brought you here so you can start learning to socialize." Vivian felt a chill run through her entire body. Did he really not know? The reason she had worked so hard to earn this reward was never to see the world or learn to socialize. It was to stand by his side as an adult woman. But it turned out this sliver of hope had been severed by him from the very beginning. Looking at the intimate, perfectly matched couple in front of her, the stinging pain in her heart grew deeper. Before Sylvia's return, he never brought a date. Now, he had made Sylvia his first. Perhaps this position had always been reserved for Sylvia. After staying for no more than a dozen minutes, she made an excuse about a classmate needing her and left. Julian watched her lonely and dejected back, his dark eyes flickering. Vivian didn't go back to the university. She walked alone outside, and as she walked, she subconsciously found herself at the park near the Forster villa. When she was a child, Julian often brought her here. The evening breeze was slightly cool. Vivian hugged her arms and found herself standing in front of the wishing well. "Vivi, make a wish at the wishing well, and it will come true." That was what Julian used to tell her to coax her as a child. Vivian's eyes reddened, and she fumbled in her bag for a coin. The bitterness and sadness she had suppressed all night made her want to vent. "I want the person I like to like me back. Julian Forster." She silently repeated his name in her heart, and the words slipped out. "I really, really like you." A blade of grass with no one to lean on, hiding it from the world, had fallen in love with the mighty tree that sheltered her from the wind and rain. After speaking, she closed her eyes, about to toss the coin. In the quiet darkness, a familiar and shocked voice suddenly came from behind her. "Who did you say you like?" Her hand, about to toss the coin, froze in midair. She turned around mechanically. She saw Leo Forster in a tracksuit, staring at her in disbelief. He came here for a run every night. Today, he heard someone mumbling and came over to check, just in time to hear the phrase, "I really, really like you." Vivian's mind buzzed. Fearing he had actually heard something, she said in a panic. Leo's face, however, suddenly turned beet red from his head all the way to his toes, as if steam was rising from his entire body. "If you like me, why didn't you just tell me directly instead of talking to a wishing well?" No, this is too hasty. This time doesn't count. You need to prepare properly. I'm heading back now. You be careful on your way back too." After saying that, he rode away on his skateboard in a flustered hurry. He was so flustered that he nearly fell off halfway. Vivian stood frozen, realizing Leo had misunderstood, but a sense of relief washed over her. He hadn't heard the name of the person she truly wanted to confess to. After that day, Leo, for once, didn't bother her for 3 consecutive days. Soon, Christmas was approaching. At some point, a trend had started among the girls to make handmade rings for the person they liked on Christmas Day. All the girls in Vivian's dorm started making them for their boyfriends. Vivian didn't have a boyfriend, but thinking of Julian, she couldn't help but make one too. She made it with extreme care, even secretly carving Julian's name on it. Before making it, she didn't dare think of giving it to him. But after finishing it, Vivian couldn't help but find excuses for herself. If she gave it to him as a birthday present, he wouldn't know it was meant for a sweetheart, right? "Uncle Julian, your birthday is coming up. I have a gift I want to give you," she cautiously called him. "Wait for me at the villa entrance tonight." Julian was probably busy. He agreed hastily and hung up. That evening, she was about to go out with the ring when she ran into Leo. He had just rejected rings from several girls and saw the one in her hand. Knowing what it represented, Leo's ears turned red again. He raised an eyebrow, forcing a calm expression. Finally prepared this time. How did you make it? It's so ugly." His words were sharp, but a smile played on his lips as he reached for the ring in her hand. Vivian's expression changed instantly. "Although it's a bit ugly, it's still presentable. I've seen so many rings today, and this is the one I like. So I'll reluctantly accept." The rest of his words got stuck in his throat when he saw the name carved on the ring. A few seconds later, his expression turned icy and incredulous as he looked at her. "The person you like isn't me, but my uncle." The secret she had kept for so many years had been discovered, and by Leo of all people, a cold sweat broke out on Vivian's palms. Her first instinct was to beg Leo to keep it a secret. Although he always gave her trouble, she knew he wasn't a bad person. If she begged him sincerely, he might help her hide it. But before the words could leave her mouth, Leo seemed to fly into a rage. He stared at her, gritting his teeth. "He's 12 years older than you, and he's the one who sponsored you. Vivian Marsh, how dare you?" Even though she had long known this love was forbidden, his words still cut her to the core. Her heart trembled violently, and she hastily tried to cover it up. This is just a birthday present for Uncle Julian. With that, she used all her strength to snatch the ring back. Before Leo could say anything more, she turned and ran away in disgrace. She ran so fast that she didn't see the path in the dark and accidentally fell into a large puddle. After scrambling up, she didn't dare rest for even a second and kept running forward. By the time she reached the villa entrance, she was soaked, her clothes stained with dirty water and covered in black mud and gravel. She clutched the ring tightly in her hand, a reckless courage born of despair rising in her heart. Leo already knew, so if Julian knew too, would it even matter anymore? Just as she was torn with indecision, a loud bang echoed, and a giant firework exploded in the sky. Then, one after another, fireworks bloomed across the heavens. Only then did Vivian see, on the lawn not far away, Julian holding Sylvia Vance's hand, his expression gentle, sharing the brilliant spectacle with her. His birthday, he was spending it with another woman. The cold wind blew, making her, already drenched, feel even colder. She slowly raised her hand and saw that the once exquisite ring was now stained with dirty water. Julian's name on it was already blurred and indistinct. Vivian no longer had the courage to walk over. She turned silently, wiped her tears, and left. On her way back, she sent Julian a text message. Uncle Julian, the gift got ruined. I'll give it to you next time. Okay, rest early. He clearly didn't care at all. Vivian fought back the tears welling in her eyes and walked back to her dorm, step by step. After that, she didn't dare to fantasize anymore. She forced herself to study like a madwoman, trying not to think about anything else. Occasionally, when she ran into Leo at school, he no longer picked on her as he used to. Instead, he would pretend not to see her, until Vivian took the initiative to stop him. About the ring, please don't tell Uncle Julian. Leo looked at her coldly. Do you think I would actively bring it up? A pain shot through Vivian's heart. That's right, he wouldn't say anything. Her feelings for Julian were too scandalous. Even if she had no shame, the Forster family did. She lowered her head and said a quiet thank you, then left with her eyes downcast. Leo watched her retreating back. Remembering the moment he saw Julian's name on the ring that night, he felt a fire of jealousy burning in his heart, a jealousy that threatened to consume him whole. Time passed quickly, and Rongcheng was about to enter winter. One morning, Vivian suddenly received a call saying her grandmother had been hospitalized. Her heart seized with panic. She immediately requested leave and rushed to the hospital. Mrs. Billionaire Marsh had actually been in good health all these years, which was why Vivian could live at the dorm with peace of mind, calling her every weekend. Her grandma had always been healthy, but she was getting old. This time, she had suddenly fainted. Thankfully, a neighbor found her early. Vivian sat by her bed, her eyes red. Grandma, I'm sorry. It's all my fault for not caring for you enough. Billionaire was already awake. Her wrinkled hand grasped Vivian's. Vivi, it's not your fault. Grandma's just old. You're so busy with school. Hurry back to your classes. Vivian shook her head, her eyes red. I want to stay with you. Just then, a nurse walked in. The patient needs to be hospitalized for a few days for observation. Remember to go to the front desk to pay the hospital fees. Only then did Vivian stand up. She had been working part-time diligently and had saved up a little money. After paying the hospital fees, Vivian stayed with her grandmother for another night, promising to visit every afternoon before returning to school the next day. On the afternoon of the third day, when she went to the hospital, the doctor called her out of the room. Your grandmother might have a problem with her heart. Vivian's mind went blank. The next second, she heard the doctor say, if we operate in time, the chances of recovery are high. It's just that the surgery costs $50,000. $50,000 to her, this was an astronomical sum. The hospitalization and treatment fees these past few days had already used up most of her money. Have you decided? Will you do the surgery or not? Vivian was panicking, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, a cold, deep voice came from behind her. Do the surgery. Immediately transfer the patient to a VIP room. Vivian was startled. She turned to see Julian striding toward her. He was tall and slender, wearing a black overcoat. The assistant behind him had already approached the doctor to discuss the upcoming surgery. Uncle Julian? Julian glanced at her, his eyes seemingly filled with displeasure, but he entered the ward first. Vivian stood in the corner of the room, watching him comfort her grandmother and then arrange for her transfer to the VIP room. After all that was done, he led her out into the hallway. "Why didn't you tell me Grandma was sick?" Vivian lowered her head. It wasn't that she hadn't thought of asking Julian for help, but she felt she already owed him too much. A young girl's thoughts were always complicated. It was as if the more she owed Julian, the further away from him she became. "Uncle Julian, I will pay back all the money I owe you." Julian hadn't expected her to say this. He frowned. "What?" As if afraid he wouldn't believe her, Vivian took out a notebook from her bag. "This is my ledger. I've recorded every penny you've spent on me. Uncle Julian, I will definitely pay you back." Seeing her serious expression, Julian's dark eyes deepened. "Are you trying to draw a line between us?" "No, then you don't have to pay it back." Vivian, however, was surprisingly stubborn, whispering, "I will." He really didn't know what she was insisting on. He frowned. "You are the student I sponsor. It's my duty to help you." Little did he know, this was the very thing Vivian cared about most. For a long time now, she hadn't wanted to be just the student he sponsored. Before she could speak, Julian's phone rang. He answered it. "Sylvia." "What's wrong?" Hearing Sylvia's name, Vivian watched his retreating figure, then turned with a pang of bitterness and walked back into the ward. Her grandmother looked at her reddened eyes, her cloudy gaze seeming exceptionally clear. Vivian sat silently in the hospital room without a word. Finally, Elinor sighed and said, "Vivi, don't be in love with Julian anymore. You two are from different worlds." Vivian froze, looking up to meet her grandmother's all-seeing eyes. The old woman's heart was like a clear mirror. "It's impossible between you two. Give up." Hearing these words, Vivian's tears suddenly fell, her voice small and sad. "I'm sorry, Grandma, I can't give up." If she could have given up on him, she would never have let herself fall in love with him in the first place. Elinor could only shake her head helplessly. She was old, and there were many things she no longer had the power to change. A short while later, a nurse came in with a wallet. The person who just paid the fees left this behind. They forgot to take it. Vivian took it, thinking it belonged to the assistant. But when she opened it, she saw Julian's ID inside. The next day, she took advantage of her free afternoon to go to the Forster estate. The Forsters were hosting a party, and the villa was exceptionally lively, with socialites and madams in expensive gowns milling about. When Vivian walked in, dressed plainly, many cast strange glances her way. Just then, Sylvia Vance suddenly appeared before her. "Vivi, what are you doing here?" "I came to bring something to Uncle Julian," she said softly. Sylvia smiled, a hint of the lady of the house in her tone. "Julian is a bit busy right now. You can give it to me, and I'll pass it on to him." Before Vivian could reply, several socialites walked over. "Well, if it isn't Sylvia Vance. After all these years, you're still clinging to Julian Forster. How could she let go? This is her golden opportunity to marry up." "Exactly. The Cinderella waiting to marry into wealth." The snide remarks made Sylvia's face turn pale. Although Vivian was young, she couldn't stand them humiliating someone like that. Just as she was about to speak, the women's gazes fell on her. Seeing Vivian's cheap clothes and backpack, their eyes filled with disdain. "Who are you? The Forsters' new help? No wonder you're chatting with Sylvia Vance. At a party like this, you two are probably the only ones who have anything in common." With that, they giggled. Vivian's face flushed, but she remained composed. "Please be more respectful, Miss. Vance is an honored guest invited by Mr. Forster, and I am not the help you speak of." Before she could finish, a steady set of footsteps approached. Julian Forster stopped beside Sylvia, and everyone instantly fell silent. He saw Vivian standing nearby, but his eyes hardened, and he said nothing. Instead, upon seeing the aggrieved look on Sylvia's face, his brows knitted together. "Did someone bully you?" The arrogant socialites from a moment ago immediately tensed up. Sylvia glanced at them, a look of someone trying to swallow her grievances. "No." Julian frowned and looked at the others, then took her hand without another word. "If anyone dares to trouble you again, I guarantee they won't be able to stay in this circle." With that single sentence, he had clearly drawn Sylvia into his circle of protection, making it impossible for anyone to speak ill of her again. With that, he led Sylvia away, not even glancing at Vivian beside them. The socialites didn't dare say another word. However, feeling they had lost face, and seeing that Julian had completely ignored Vivian from beginning to end, They vented their frustration by humiliating Vivian one last time before dispersing. Having been humiliated multiple times, Vivian had forgotten how to retort, standing alone, her hands trembling slightly. He had chosen to stand up only for Sylvia, ignoring her as she was being ridiculed. Yes, Grandma was right. He and she, one a cold, noble CEO, the other a parentless, poor student, were worlds apart. They were from two different worlds. He had no obligation to protect her. If it weren't for that night 3 months ago, that's what she should have thought. But he had, in fact, shared a moment of fierce tenderness with her. That night, he was drunk. He had suddenly hugged her, suddenly kissed her, suddenly possessed her. He held her in his arms, kissing her eyes over and over, whispering, "I like you so much." It was that tenderness that had given birth to such an audacious fantasy, making her think that maybe he really did like her a little, that he liked this little girl he had sheltered under his wing since childhood. But like a fleeting illusion, he was gone the next morning. When they met again, he intentionally or unintentionally wanted her to completely forget that night. Julian Forster, that night was my everything. But to you, what was that night? Vivian stared blankly at the backs of Julian and Sylvia as they walked away, her entire heart aching terribly. She forced herself to look away. Just as she was about to turn, the world suddenly spun. A flash of white light crossed her vision, and she fainted. When she woke up, Vivian found herself lying in a luxuriously decorated room. Standing beside her was, surprisingly, Leo Forster. Seeing her awake, Leo hid the worry in his eyes and said coldly, "If you're awake, then get out." She sat up, her voice still hoarse. "You saved me," Leo deliberately pricked her. "What? Disappointed it wasn't my uncle?" Vivian fell silent, only then belatedly recognizing that this was Leo's room. She hurriedly got out of bed and said softly, "Thank you." As she was about to leave, Leo spoke again. "What were you trying to do here? Faint to get his attention?" Vivian knew that no matter what she said now, he wouldn't believe her. She lowered her head and took the wallet out of her bag. "I came to return something to Uncle Julian. Can you give it back to him for me? I never thought of using such a method to get anyone's attention. I fainted because I've been too tired taking care of my grandmother these past few days. Sorry to trouble you. I'm leaving now." With that, without looking at Leo's expression, she hurried away with red-rimmed eyes. That night, Leo delivered the wallet to Julian's study. "Uncle Julian, Vivian Marsh came looking for you today to return this." She also fainted. He didn't know why he mentioned it, but his eyes held a hint of probing. Julian was slightly taken aback, then his expression became impassive. "I see." Seeing that he seemed completely unconcerned, the young man frowned. After a few seconds of hesitation, he couldn't help but ask, "That's it? You're not going to ask anything else? Weren't you the one who always cared about her the most?" Julian calmly looked at his computer, processing work. "She's grown up. I can't look after her for the rest of her life." After a pause, he looked at Leo, his tone thoughtful. "And you, why have you suddenly started caring about her?" As if his deepest, most hidden thoughts had been exposed, Leo's tone became flustered. "Me care about her? I just feel sorry for her since the thing is delivered. I'll be going now." Watching Leo's hurried departure, Julian's gaze grew even deeper. On the other side, Vivian had been listless for the past 2 days. Ever since leaving the Forster estate that day, it was as if she had left her soul behind. She could only pour all her energy into her studies, carrying a book wherever she went. One day, she was memorizing vocabulary on the road, not watching where she was going, and accidentally bumped into someone. "I'm sorry," she quickly apologized, but her expression stiffened slightly when she saw the person in front of her. "Miss Vance," Sylvia nodded at her. Just as Vivian was about to leave after apologizing, Sylvia suddenly stopped her. "Vivi, let's have a talk." Vivian didn't know how to refuse and could only go with her. The two walked down the path, each with their own thoughts. In the end, it was Sylvia who spoke first. "You know, sometimes when I see you, it's like seeing myself back then." Vivian's heart clenched. She thought of the scene where they were both humiliated by those socialites. She never knew that Sylvia was also looked down upon in that circle. That's right. Julian Forster had always been the moon, high in the sky. It wasn't that she didn't know how powerful the Forster family was. How could an ordinary family ever be worthy of him? Julian and I were high school classmates. We were each other's first love, but fate played a cruel trick. My family background was poor, so the Forsters looked down on me and didn't approve of us being together. They threatened to prevent me from going to university to break us up. But now, Julian is in charge of the Forster family. No one can break us up anymore. Vivian could hear a hint of triumph in her tone. She never knew they had such a past between them. If both she and Sylvia were not from the same world as Uncle Julian, yet Uncle Julian was willing to pull Sylvia into his world while completely shutting her out. That was the biggest difference between her and Sylvia. Sylvia suddenly stopped walking and turned to look at her. "Vivi, you like Julian, don't you?" Vivian stopped abruptly, her body stiffening. Sylvia, however, spoke with an air of understanding. "How could you not like someone who changed your life? But it's impossible for him to like you. Do you know why, out of all people, a man as aloof as him chose to sponsor only you? For no reason, with no conditions, yet he raised you to this age and treated you so well. Vivian Marsh, haven't you noticed that you and we actually look a bit alike? Especially our eyes, you really, really look like me." Vivian didn't know when Sylvia finally left, she only knew. Those words were like one clap of thunder after another, exploding over her head. Especially the last sentence, "Haven't you noticed that you have a pair of eyes very similar to mine?" The first time they met, his deep gaze met hers. He had said, "From now on, I'll take care of you." The first time they were intimate, he held her tightly, kissing her eyes with a lingering, tender passion. He had said, "I like you so much." So, all his special treatment of her, including that night, was it all just because she had a pair of eyes that resembled Sylvia Vance's? No, impossible. She had to ask him to get a clear answer. She had to find Julian Forster and ask him the Forster estate. Lightning flashed and thunder roared outside, but the main door was thrown open. Julian was sitting on the sofa, looking at a report. Seeing Vivian run in, drenched and with red-rimmed eyes, he couldn't help but frown. "What's wrong with you?" Vivian walked toward him step by step, her voice trembling. "Uncle Julian, the reason you sponsored me back then, was it because you thought I looked like Sylvia Vance?" Vivian stared at Julian's face, thinking, as long as he denied it, as long as he denied that everything he had given her all these years was because of Sylvia. As long as he denied it, no matter what anyone else said, she would only believe him. But Julian just looked at her quietly, his hand holding the report, pausing slightly. His dark eyes swirled with an emotion she couldn't comprehend. After a long time, he uttered a single word. "Yes." Vivian's heart trembled, and she felt a chilling cold seep through her entire body. "When I was 12 and being bullied, you left a meeting and rushed over to stand up for me. Was that because I look like Sylvia?" "Yes." "When I was 14 and received a love letter, you flew back from abroad that very night to warn me against dating early. Was that because I look like Sylvia?" "Yes." "On my 15th birthday, you booked the entire city's fireworks for me for a whole night. Was that because I look like Sylvia?" "Yes." She was trembling violently, saying word by word, "On my 18th birthday, the night you got drunk, the reason you treated me that way, was it also because I look like Sylvia?" That night, he had held her tightly, kissed her. That moment of fierce entanglement had made her feel that he was deeply in love with her too. But now, he was telling her that all along, the reason he treated her differently was only because she had a pair of eyes that looked just like his ex's. Julian's dark eyes moved. After a long silence, he used one final word to cast her completely into hell. "Yes. Vivi, about that night 3 months ago, I'm very sorry. I didn't intentionally forget it, I just felt it was an accident and there was no need to bring it up again. If you can forget it, I can compensate you." Compensate. That one word instantly shattered all the defenses she had been holding up. Her voice trembled. "Uncle Julian, what do you take me for? Can you really not see that I like you?" That was her first time. The man was stunned for a moment, but there was no shock in his eyes, only cold indifference. His expression was gentle, but his voice was cold. "I'm sorry, that's not what I meant. It's just that, apart from that, I don't know how else to make it up to you. I can give you anything you want, except the love you're asking for. I can't be with a kid, not to mention I'm a decade older than you. It's normal to have urges during puberty, and it's normal to mistake dependency for love. Vivi, you should go and like a boy your own age. Don't put your thoughts on me anymore. As for that night," he paused, a rare hesitation, "consider this compensation. Apart from that, whatever you want, you can tell me." It was as if her heart had been brutally gouged out, only to be doused with salt water, causing an instant of excruciating pain. His words made her see clearly how cheap she was. She took a deep breath, barely managing to maintain her last shred of dignity in front of him. "I don't need any compensation, Uncle Julian. Everything I did in the past, I did willingly. I will listen to you and completely forget that night. Consider it repayment for your kindness all these years." After a long while, she finally stopped her trembling and said, word by word, "Since your heart belongs to someone else, I won't pester you anymore. Don't worry, from now on, I will not like you anymore. I will forget that night, and I will forget you. I wish you and Miss Vance a long and happy life together for all the years to come." This long, secret love had ended in such a tragic way. After speaking, she walked out, step by step. Outside, it was a bright, sunny day, but Vivian felt a chilling cold all over her body. She had told herself not to cry, but tears streamed down her face nonstop, drop after drop, soaking her white dress. Suddenly remembering something, Vivian took out the ring carved with Julian's name from her pocket. To Julian, this was probably just a childish trinket, but to her, it carried the most sincere feelings of her girlhood. Now she could only be glad she hadn't given it to him. She was already pathetic enough. She couldn't let herself become any more so. She clenched the ring in her hand and threw it forcefully into the nearby bushes. Then, she turned and walked away. A few minutes later, a figure emerged from the villa and picked up the ring from the ground. The name on it was already blurred and indistinct. Leo Forster didn't know what was wrong with him. He looked in the direction Vivian had disappeared. Holding the ring, he, as if possessed, put it on his own hand. Vivian didn't go back to the university. She wandered aimlessly on the streets. From day to night, her eyes were so swollen from crying it was as if she had shed a lifetime of tears. There was no color in her face. Several passersby even asked if she needed to be taken to the hospital, but she just shook her head numbly, until the phone in her pocket began to vibrate. It was a call from the hospital. On the other end, an anxious voice came through. "Miss Marsh, your grandmother's condition has suddenly worsened. Please come to the hospital immediately." Vivian's mind went blank, the earlier wave of sadness instantly replaced by fear. Hanging up the phone, she immediately ran in the direction of the hospital. Her heart was shrouded in immense panic and fear. She didn't notice the green light had turned red, and a turning truck was speeding toward her. Bang, the entire world fell silent. The Forster Villa. Julian's gaze was fixed on the open financial report. The man, who was usually incredibly focused, couldn't read a single number now. His mind was filled with the image of the young girl, running out with red-rimmed eyes. And that night, the night of intense passion. The words he had said earlier were too heartless, so much so that even Vivian hadn't noticed the cold sweat that had broken out on his palms as he said them. But he couldn't indulge in such foolishness with a girl so young. That night, 3 months ago, was already his failing. Thunder rumbled outside the window. He took off his gold-rimmed glasses and loosened his tie, suddenly feeling an inexplicable sense of turmoil. Suddenly, the phone on his side rang. Thinking it was a work call, he answered it casually. But when he heard the voice on the other end, his mind went completely blank. "Hello, is this a relative of Vivian Marsh? She was in a car accident on Southwest Road at 3 p.m. and is currently being treated at our hospital. Do you have time to come over?" Before the person on the other end could finish, he had already shot up from his seat, grabbed his car keys, and bolted out the door. It was the first time he had ever lost control like this. He ran countless red lights on the way, and his hands were trembling as he pulled out the car key. Finally arriving at the hospital, he reached her floor, only to freeze in place at the sight before him. Vivian was already awake, her head wrapped in gauze. She was clinging tightly to Leo Forster, refusing to let go. "I won't let you go. You are my boyfriend. If you're not my boyfriend, how come you have the ring I made? I remember I made this for my beloved." Leo's entire ears turned red, and he stammered, "Vivian Marsh, let go of me." "I won't, unless you admit you're my boyfriend." As she spoke, she hugged him even tighter, as if afraid he would leave. Watching the two of them in such an intimate scene, Julian felt a current run through his entire body, the shock so great he could barely breathe. He forcefully pushed open the room door and called her name sternly. "Vivian Marsh." Vivian looked up at him, but her eyes no longer held the love of the past, only strangeness. "Who are you, mister?" A deathly silence filled the hospital room for about 10 seconds. Leo looked like he'd seen a ghost and tried to push her away, but he was afraid of hurting her and didn't dare to use force. It wasn't until Vivian let go on her own, her eyes still fixed on his face, that he saw a fervor he had never seen before. His mind began to drift. Being held by her like this wasn't so bad after all. Just as he was thinking this, his gaze fell on Julian, who was watching him with cold eyes. As if caught doing something wrong, he snapped back to reality. "Vivian Marsh, stop dreaming. How could I be your boyfriend?" He put on the same impatient act as before, but Vivian didn't keep her distance from him as she used to. Instead, she held his hand. "You are. Otherwise, why are you wearing the ring I made?" Leo was shocked. What the hell? Didn't they say this girl had amnesia? At that moment, Julian's gaze also shifted to his wrist. Leo swallowed hard. The name on it was now illegible. He was at a loss for words. Yet there was a strange sense of relief that Julian's name was no longer visible. "You are my boyfriend." Vivian tugged at his arm with both hands, and Leo, for the life of him, didn't know how to refute her. This was maddening. Until a hand forcefully separated them. Julian stood in front of her and said coldly, "Get back in bed and rest." Vivian looked at him with dissatisfaction. "Who are you anyway? Why are you always bossing me around? I want to be with my boyfriend." Julian had probably never been spoken to with such impatience in his life, especially by the young girl who used to cling to him the most. Seeing Vivian's reluctance to part with Leo, an inexplicable anger rose in his heart. Even though Vivian had forgotten him as he wished, Julian felt that this was simply awful. Leo also looked at Vivian in surprise. It was rare to see her so bold in front of his uncle. "I'll say it one more time. Get back in bed and rest." Julian's voice was cold and filled with a sense of pressure, a prelude to his anger. Although Vivian no longer recognized him, her heart instinctively trembled. What right did this man have to be so fierce with her? She held back her grievance and looked at her boyfriend. She was being treated so harshly. Wasn't he going to do anything about it? Seeing Vivian's gaze turn to him, Leo shivered. "No, don't look at me. I'm more scared of him than you are." Her boyfriend was unreliable. Vivian bit her lip and walked back to the bed, her eyes quietly turning red. Julian tried to continue feeding her porridge, but Vivian kept her lips stubbornly shut. The two were locked in a silent battle of wills. Feeling the suffocating atmosphere in the room and seeing Vivian's "I'd rather starve to death today" attitude, Leo finally spoke up cautiously. "Uncle Julian, maybe I should feed her." Hearing this, Vivian's eyes immediately lit up, and she looked at him expectantly. Julian was silent for a few moments, before finally handing the bowl of porridge to Leo. Leo's movements were clumsy as he fed her, even dripping some on her face, but she was exceptionally happy, constantly looking at him with a gaze full of love and tenderness. Julian didn't know when he left the room. In the doctor's office, Julian's expression was so cold it could freeze water. He pressed his temples. When will she regain her memory? The doctor wasn't sure either. It depended on the patient's recovery. Some might recover quickly, while others might never recover. Hearing the doctor say that Vivian might never recover, a wave of frustration surged in Julian's heart. Do whatever it takes to help her recover her memory quickly. Leaving these words behind, Julian left the office. When he returned to the hospital room, he saw Leo putting away the porridge bowl from outside the door. Vivian was still holding his hand, not letting him go. She had just woken up and had lost part of her memory. Having finally found someone she trusted, she naturally poured all her dependence on him. "Can you stay with me a little longer? I have to go back to school. But I'm your girlfriend and I'm hurt." "No, Before Leo could finish, he saw her eyes welling up with tears as she looked at him pitifully. Her fear and insecurity were not fake. And so, the words of refutation he was about to say got stuck in his throat. He cleared his throat. "Fine, since you're so pitiful." Vivian's eyes curved into crescents, and she said joyfully, "I knew you wouldn't leave me." Outside the door, Julian watched this version of Vivian and found himself momentarily lost in thought. He had only seen such a clingy Vivian when she was a child. Once, she had been just as dependent on him. If he spared a little more time to be with her, she would be as happy as if she had the whole world. Since when had she become less dependent on him, stopped acting spoiled in front of him, and even become cautious, only daring to steal glances at him that she would quickly avert? An indescribable emotion rose in his heart. Just then, his phone began to vibrate. He answered the call. It was his assistant. Due to Vivian's car accident these past 2 days, a lot of company matters had been left unattended. It was strange. He had thought that since he could push her away so decisively and reject her feelings, he should be able to accept her leaving him. But the moment he learned of Vivian's car accident, the overwhelming fear and tension nearly crushed his heart, making him rush to her side regardless of everything, just to stay with her and confirm her safety. And when she woke up, he watched her forget him completely, watched her treat Leo as her boyfriend, watched her transfer the dependence she once had only for him onto someone else. Julian slowly clenched his fist. Is this the feeling of jealousy? No, impossible. That's ridiculous. Julian closed his eyes. I'm on my way back to the company. As if escaping, he turned decisively and left the hospital. For the next few days, Vivian recuperated in the hospital while he buried himself in work at the company. Their lives had no intersection, which was exactly what Vivian wished for. Since that day, Leo would visit Vivian every day. As soon as she saw him, she would be very happy, even after Leo explained that he wasn't her boyfriend. The ring was just something he had found, but Vivian still firmly believed that she must have liked him before. From the first second she saw that ring, she had a strong feeling the person wearing it was her lover. Julian would still occasionally visit her. Vivian was no longer as resistant to him. She asked him tentatively, "Uncle Julian, are you the one who has been sponsoring my education all these years?" Julian saw the caution in her eyes, as if she was afraid of offending her benefactor, which made him feel even worse. He sat on the chair by the bed, his suit jacket casually draped over the back. He picked up an apple from the table and began to peel it. He asked lightly, "Who told you?" For some reason, Vivian still felt a little nervous when facing him. Her hands fidgeted with the bedsheet. "Grandma told me. She said, Uncle Julian is very good to me, that I should thank you for your help and not have a bad attitude towards you." Mrs. Marsh's condition had been critical, but thankfully, she had been saved and was now recovering well. Knowing that her granddaughter had amnesia and had forgotten her feelings for Julian, she actually thought it was a good thing. Vivian's feelings for Julian were not accepted by society anyway. It was better for her to forget like this than to remain obsessed. Let Julian just be a simple elder in her heart. Everyone would be happy. Vivian thought of her attitude towards him when she first woke up and felt a little guilty. She lowered her eyes and apologized. "Uncle Julian, I'm sorry. It was all my fault before. I shouldn't have kept talking back to you." Hearing her polite apology, Julian's hand, peeling the apple, paused. After a long moment, he replied softly, "I know. It shouldn't be like this. He and Vivian shouldn't be so distant." During this time, no matter how much he tried not to think about her, his mind was filled with her image, her voice. Julian felt like he was going crazy. He finished peeling the apple, cut a small piece, and held it to her lips. Vivian's eyelashes trembled. He clearly saw the resistance in her eyes, but in the end, for some unknown reason, she still obediently opened her mouth and ate the piece of apple. He withdrew his hand and didn't feed her anymore. He placed the apple, which had only been eaten a bite of, on the table and suddenly stood up to look at her. He looked at her intently. "Do you hate me now?" Vivian froze, looking up at him timidly. She didn't really know what she was feeling. Her chest always felt tight when she saw him, which made her uncomfortable, so she subconsciously wanted to avoid him. Was this hate? But she shouldn't hate him. According to her grandma and Leo, Uncle Julian used to be very good to her, and she trusted him a lot. So Vivian shook her head and said apologetically, "I just haven't remembered the past yet." An eerie silence filled the room. Just as Vivian felt like she could barely breathe, the door was pushed open again. "Vivian Marsh, look what I brought you," Leo's cheerful voice came in, and he was holding freshly bought crab roe wontons. The moment she saw Leo, Julian witnessed Vivian let out a sigh of relief, her tightly pressed lips curving into a faint smile. "Uncle Julian, you're here too." Leo greeted him politely, his tone lacking the earlier ease. It seemed his presence made them both uncomfortable. Julian grunted in acknowledgement. "I have things to attend to at the company. I'll be leaving now. Take good care of Vivi." He picked up his jacket from the chair and left. Before closing the door, he heard Vivian's soft, happy voice. "These crab roe wontons smell so good." It was completely different from the stiffness she showed him. Julian quickly shut the door, separating himself from everything in the room. It seemed only by doing this could he suppress the slowly rising emotion in his heart, an emotion called regret. When he returned to the Forster villa, Julian got out of the car and saw Sylvia Vance waiting at the door. Seeing him, Sylvia's face immediately broke into a smile. She tried to affectionately link her arm with Julian's. "Julian, the school is having a faculty ball next week. I'd like to invite you to go with me." Her eyes were full of anticipation and excitement, as if she couldn't wait to appear before everyone as Julian's girlfriend. Then, she would become the object of everyone's envy. From then on, she would no longer be the ordinary Sylvia Vance. The poor girl who needed others to sponsor her education, she would become the girlfriend of the heir to the Forster family. She would never have to worry about money, about being looked down upon, or about struggling to build a future for herself. She was lost in her beautiful fantasy. But to her surprise, this time, Julian not only pushed her hand away but also said coldly, "I'm not free." Sylvia froze. Since they had reunited, he had always been gentle and close to her. When had he ever been so cold? She stood there, a look of hurt on her face. "Did I do something wrong?" "Julian, I thought we had started over." Julian turned his head and looked at her nonchalantly. "Who gave you the courage to think so?" Seeing the mockery in his eyes, Sylvia was in utter disbelief. He had always acted as if he couldn't forget her. Even at the party when she was humiliated, he had unhesitatingly stood by her side, not even sparing a glance for Vivian. Wait, Vivian? Was his current attitude because of Vivian? Impossible. Is it because of Vivian Marsh? Did she seduce you? "Julian, the person you love is me. We've been together since high school." Hearing Vivian's name from her lips, Julian frowned. "First, the person I love is not you. Second, we were not together in high school. I admit I had a crush on you then because you were so focused on your studies, and I admired your hard work. We were indeed close to getting together, but didn't you, back then, unhesitatingly choose the $1 million my grandfather offered and the opportunity to become a teacher at Rongcheng University?" Hearing him so bluntly state the truth of what happened back then, Sylvia's face turned deathly pale. She trembled as she asked, You knew, that's right. After they graduated from high school, Sylvia actually had the chance to go abroad with Julian. Later, old Mr. Forster found Sylvia and said, "I don't object to you two dating, but I will cut off his financial support for 4 years to test your determination to be together. But if you give up immediately, the Forster family can give you $100,000 to let you study in peace." In addition, she was being pursued by the son of Rongcheng University's vice principal, who promised her that if she stayed at Rongcheng to study with him, he would help her become a teacher there in the future and would definitely marry her. Sylvia weighed her options for a long time. Julian was undoubtedly the best catch in her heart, but the Forster family's standards were too high. Even if they dated, she might not be able to marry into the family. She didn't want to waste her time. Besides, his grandfather was still in charge of the family. Did she really have to go abroad with him and suffer for 4 years? The vice principal of Rongcheng University was nothing compared to the Forster family, but for someone of her background, marrying into his family was still a step up in social class. Sylvia finally made her choice. She accepted old Mr. Forster's $100,000 and the vice principal's son's pursuit. She just didn't expect Julian to be so outstanding. After completing his studies abroad, he immediately returned to the country to take over the family business. Later, old Mr. Forster passed away from an illness, and Julian became the actual head of the Forster family. And there had been no women by his side all this time. Sylvia was filled with regret and resentment, feeling more and more that she had made the wrong choice. Later, she was even more determined to climb up. She dumped her boyfriend of many years and had been looking for a chance to reunite with Julian. She never thought fate would be so kind to her. At that Rongcheng University convocation, they actually met. And he even said he had come to find her. Sylvia had always thought Julian didn't know about the past, that he had never forgotten her. But it turned out, he knew everything. Sylvia was unwilling to accept it. Her eyes red, she tried to explain, "Julian, listen to me, it was a misunderstanding back then. The person I love has always been you. I had no choice but to leave." Julian looked at her coolly, then suddenly shook his head. "It doesn't matter, I don't care about any of that. To him, that was more than 10 years ago. Julian hadn't even liked her that much back then. At most, it was a crush. In his first year abroad, he had already forgotten about Sylvia. And after returning to the country, the reason he got close to her was only because, looking at the indifferent man before her, Sylvia suddenly felt as if she had never truly known him. "Then what about how you treated me recently?" Julian sneered. "That was just an act for someone else to see, and since you were willing to play along, I just put on a few shows." Sylvia trembled, as if she suddenly understood something. "You were acting for Vivian Marsh. You love Vivian Marsh." Hearing the word love, Julian instinctively resisted. His dark eyes deepened. "Sylvia, don't talk nonsense." But Sylvia seemed to have gone mad. Her long-term boyfriend had been kicked to the curb, her dream of marrying into a wealthy family was shattered. She screamed recklessly, "Julian Forster, you maniac, you actually love the student you sponsor? I'm going to tell everyone you're a pervert." Julian's gaze shot toward her, terrifyingly cold. "You can go and spread whatever nonsense you want. Let's see if Rongcheng will still have a place for you then." Peeling away the gentle facade of recent times, he revealed his true, cold, and ruthless nature. He walked into the villa without a care, leaving Sylvia frozen in place, her body trembling uncontrollably. Late at night. The light in Julian's study was still on, but for the first time, it wasn't because he was working. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes half-closed in exhaustion. Sylvia's sharp voice echoed in his ears. The 5 words, "You love Vivian Marsh," broke into his mind with unstoppable force, lodging deep in his heart. It brought back the memory of that night, the one he was most unwilling to recall. That night, he and Vivian had crossed the final line, foolishly sleeping together. But was he really not sober at the time? He couldn't even lie to himself. The moment Vivian's lips unexpectedly touched his mind was filled with her face. Under the influence of alcohol, he had abandoned all reason and composure and kissed her forcefully. Vivian hadn't rejected him. Of course, why would she reject him? The young girl's affection was not something she could hide. He had long seen her love for him. And on that night, he too had been unable to control his feelings. Yet he could only, cowardly and despicably, use the excuse of alcohol to possess her completely. Julian knew how despicable he was. He didn't dare to accept Vivian's love, yet he couldn't control his desire to be close to her. So he could only use Sylvia as an excuse to drive her away, only hurt her again and again to force her to stop loving him. Yet when she truly forgot him, he was filled with extreme resentment. Julian Forster, how could there be such a shameless man in this world? He closed his eyes, letting the self-loathing wash over him. He sat in his study all night. The next morning when he came out, his usually impeccable face had a faint stubble, and his always neat hair was disheveled. Leo also came out of his room with a bag, and seeing his uncle like this, he was stunned. Julian saw that Leo was holding a set of study materials that were clearly not his own. "Are you taking those to Vivi?" Leo nodded. He had been unusually kind lately, worried that Vivian's hospital stay would affect her studies, so he had taken the initiative to bring her materials. But that girl would surely be happy to see these. Thinking of her surprised expression, Leo himself felt happy. He didn't notice Julian's increasingly cold gaze. "Do you like Vivian Marsh?" Julian asked directly. Leo was taken aback, his handsome face suddenly turning red. I just..." Before he could answer, Julian continued, "She's only so close to you now because she thinks you're her boyfriend. What happens when she regains her memory? What will you do then?" "Leo, she's the one with amnesia, not you. Don't get too into character." Even he didn't realize how much strange emotion was mixed into these barbed words, but Leo seemed to have heard it. The usually carefree young man's face suddenly turned serious. A strange burst of courage briefly overcame his reverence for his uncle. He said, "Uncle Julian, I know. The person Vivian likes is you." This direct statement stunned Julian. Leo continued, "She came to find you before the car accident. I know you rejected her. And I also know, Uncle Julian, that it's wrong for Vivian to like you. Isn't it a good thing that she has amnesia now?" This was the first time Leo had ever rendered his respected uncle speechless. He even felt a wave of fear immediately after saying it, but Julian didn't seem to want to argue with him. After a few seconds of silence, he asked again, "Do you like her?" As if a hidden thought had been exposed, Julian defensively ran a hand through his hair. I don't know, maybe I just feel sorry for her. Is it like or not like? Julian asked again. Leo thought for a moment and finally answered, like. The uncle and nephew stood there in silence. Looking at Leo's young and determined gaze, Julian suddenly felt like he had truly lost. He couldn't even compare to Leo. After a long moment, he turned to leave, his voice heavy. Then don't let her down. Leo stared at his back, seeing a hint of loneliness. How could his always invincible uncle have such an emotion? Before Leo could figure it out, Julian had already closed his room door. That evening, Julian received a call from his assistant. There was a project abroad that required Julian's follow-up, and he needed to go to the United States for 3 months. Julian agreed. Before leaving, he visited Vivian's hospital room again. Her health had improved a lot, and her complexion was gradually returning to a healthy pink. When she saw Julian, she would give a faint smile. I'm going on a business trip abroad recently, so I won't have much chance to take care of you. If you need anything, just tell Leo, okay? His voice was incredibly gentle, which gave Vivian a very familiar feeling. She nodded obediently. Okay, Uncle Julian, I wish you a safe trip. After saying this, she just looked at him quietly, as if there was nothing more to say. But Julian suddenly remembered when Vivian was 12 years old. He had to go on a business trip before her birthday. She had hugged him with red eyes, not wanting him to go. The Vivian of that time would hug him and act spoiled, every word full of reluctance to see him go. Uncle Julian, you promised you would spend my birthday with me. You're going to France again? That's so far from Rongcheng. You'll be gone for a long time, won't you? Uncle Julian, I don't want you to go. Her voice had grown smaller as she spoke, and in the end, she hugged him and cried softly. Julian had comforted her for a long time, but he still left. He later found out that a classmate had mocked her for being a parentless orphan, saying no one would remember her birthday. Vivian had retorted, "That's not true. I have Uncle Julian and he will spend it with me." In the end, he had missed it due to work. When he returned, he was filled with guilt and threw her a grand birthday party. He asked her what gift she wanted, and she whispered in his ear, "Uncle Julian, I don't want anything. As long as you're by my side, I'm so happy." It was probably from that time that he started to pay more attention to this little girl who relied on him with all her heart. But now, facing the same situation of his impending departure, the person before him would no longer cry and beg him to stay. Instead, she smiled and wished him a safe trip, completely unconcerned about his departure, and not at all looking forward to his return. Until he was on the plane to the United States, getting further and further away from the city where she was, the pain in Julian's chest became more and more pronounced. It hurt so much that his brows knitted together, his heart feeling as if it were stuffed with cotton, making it almost impossible to breathe. The days passed, and a month had gone by since Julian left. The school was on winter break. Vivian had also been discharged from the hospital and had returned home with her grandmother. The winters in Rongcheng were always cold. Vivian returned to the old apartment complex where she lived with her grandmother and was so cold that she didn't dare to go downstairs for days. And so it was New Year's Eve, a time for family reunions. Vivian looked at the fireworks outside the window and, for some reason, suddenly thought of Julian. Was he still alone in the United States? Should she send him a text message wishing him a happy new year? What time was it in the US now? Would sending a text now be too much of a bother? She hesitated for a long time before finally deciding to send one. After all, Julian had helped her and her grandmother so much. If she didn't even send a polite New Year's text, it would be too improper. With this thought, Vivian opened her phone and spent a full 10 minutes composing a message. She only managed to write one sentence. "Uncle Julian, it's Vivi. I wish you a happy new year and a prosperous and successful year ahead." She went back and forth, deliberating for a long time. She felt the sentence sounded sincere and couldn't find any fault with it, so she hit send. She thought he wouldn't see it so quickly, but less than a minute after she sent the text, her phone rang. She was a little surprised and answered it in a hurry. It was quiet on the other end. Vivian's heart panicked, thinking she might have woken him up. After a few seconds of hesitation, she took the initiative to speak. "Hello, Uncle Julian?" 3 seconds later, the man's deep, mellow voice came through the receiver. "Vivi." The voice was low and deep. For some reason, Vivian suddenly shivered. She took a breath and said again, "Today is New Year's Eve. I wanted to wish you a happy new year. I didn't disturb you, did I? No. He always answered quickly, and his words were brief. Vivian didn't know what else to say. Thinking he was probably busy, she said considerately, "Then you can get back to work. I'll hang up now." Just as she was about to press the end call button, he suddenly spoke from the other end. "Don't hang up." Vivian was stunned. Julian's voice was tinged with fatigue. "Let me listen to your voice a little longer." Outside the apartment complex, Julian's car was parked downstairs from Vivian's home. He was wearing a black overcoat, quietly looking at Vivian's room through the car window. He had been working for over a dozen hours straight, just to make a temporary trip back to see her on New Year's Eve. But by the time his car reached her building, Julian suddenly realized he didn't seem to have a reason to come back and see her. At least, not in her mind. On the other end, Vivian didn't quite understand what he meant and just thought he was tired from work. "Uncle Julian, is it very tiring in the US? A little. Can't you even rest on New Year's Eve? Even though Americans don't celebrate the New Year today, you should give yourself a break. If you're very tired, you can ask your assistant to make you a cup of lemon water. It can help relieve fatigue." She suddenly opened up, chattering on and on. Julian felt his fatigue disappear just from hearing her voice. He let Vivian talk, not saying a word for a long time, until his assistant came over to remind him that it was almost time to go to the airport. Only then did he slowly part his lips. "Vivi, are there fireworks in Rongcheng today?" "Huh." Vivian was caught off guard, not understanding why he was suddenly interested in that. She quickly got up. "I don't know. Hold on, let me open the window and see." The next second, Julian saw the window upstairs open, and a fluffy head popped out. Vivian was wearing pink bunny pajamas, leaning against the window and gazing at the dark sky. "There are no fireworks today." Julian sat in the car, staring at her face. It took him a moment to reply, "I see." She thought he was disappointed. Although she found it surprising that a mature and steady man like Uncle Julian would like to watch fireworks, she still tried to comfort him. "There might be some at midnight. I'll record a video for you then." Julian smiled faintly. "Okay, I'll wait for you." After hanging up, Vivian didn't notice a black luxury car that had been parked downstairs for a long time slowly driving away in the moonlight. She leaned on the windowsill, a little dazed, a feeling of melancholy suddenly rising in her heart. She didn't know where this emotion came from. It seemed to come from the depths of her heart, from that forgotten part of her memory. After a long while, she retreated back into her room, closing the window against the increasingly cold wind. At 12 o'clock, the New Year's bells chimed. Outside, one dazzling firework after another suddenly bloomed. Only then did Vivian open the window again, record a short video of about 10 seconds, and send it to Julian. But this time, there was no reply for a long time. Vivian waited for a while, assuming he was busy, and didn't think much of it. Soon, she fell into a deep sleep. Julian didn't land until noon the next day, and Vivian slept until the sun was high in the sky. When she woke up, she found that Julian had already replied to her message. "The fireworks are beautiful. Happy New Year." A sudden joy filled her heart, and a small smile curved her lips. After that, the two of them didn't contact each other for a long time. The winter break soon passed, and she returned to school. "Hey, Vivian Marsh, have lunch with me." When she met Leo at school, he still had that cool and awkward demeanor, but he handed her the water he had just bought. Vivian took it with a smile and walked to his side. "Okay." Leo's friend, seeing their interaction, thought he was seeing things. He had personally witnessed how much Leo used to despise this top student, and how this top student, while always silently enduring young Master Forster's bullying, had never smiled so happily. Ryan Jones whispered in Leo's ear, "Leo, did she put a spell on you, or did you put a spell on her?" Leo's eyes widened. "Ryan, what nonsense are you talking about? Didn't you used to hate her the most? You even said she was just a poor student your family sponsors. Why are you buying her water now? And inviting her to lunch?" Remembering all the things he had done in the past, Leo, afraid Vivian would hear, punched Ryan hard. Shut up, forced into submission by his tyranny, Ryan shut his mouth. The three of them walked forward together, but he couldn't help but turn to Vivian again. "Top student Vivian, when did you and Brother Forster get so close?" Vivian looked at him, puzzled, and said frankly, "Because I like him." "What?" Leo, who was drinking water, couldn't hold it in when he heard Vivian's words and choked violently. Even Ryan's shriek was almost drowned out by the sound of him spitting water. Vivian quickly took out a tissue from her bag to wipe his mouth. Under Ryan's "the world has gone mad" gaze, Leo awkwardly pushed Vivian's hand away. But his earlobes were quietly turning red. Leo swore he had no intention of taking advantage of Vivian's amnesia to pose as her boyfriend. He had already explained that he had just found the ring. But the name Julian Forster on it, or rather the remaining faint character for Forster, was still vaguely visible. This only made Vivian more certain that she had made it for Leo Forster. What could he do? Was he supposed to tell her that the name carved on it was actually his uncle's? In short, no matter how much Leo denied it, Vivian was already convinced that the person she liked was him. After his shock, Ryan had a look of sudden realization, his tone teasing. "Brother Forster, I was wondering why you suddenly started being so gentle. So you're in love, huh? No wonder you used to pick on her and only her. You're one of those types, huh? You deliberately try to get the attention of the one you like, right?" Vivian looked at him in confusion. "Leo used to bully me." Ryan's big mouth was about to open when Leo clamped a hand over it. "No one will think you're mute if you don't talk." The three of them then stopped in front of the teaching building. Leo pulled Ryan up the stairs. "I left something in the classroom. Vivian, wait for us here." Vivian nodded and waited quietly below. A moment later, a figure in white suddenly walked toward her. Sylvia Vance looked at Vivian, her eyes hiding a deep jealousy. Vivian had forgotten her previous memories of Sylvia. She had only seen her a couple of times in class and knew she was the school's English teacher. "Hello, Miss Vance." Sylvia glanced at Leo's figure on the stairs, then turned her cold gaze back to Vivian. "Vivian Marsh, you really have some skills. You won't let go of any of the Forster men, will you?" Vivian didn't understand what she meant, but she could hear the sarcasm in her words. Her heart instinctively clenched. Her intuition told her that this Miss Vance did not like her. Sylvia was indeed blinded by jealousy, her words growing more and more harsh. "What? You're not clinging to Julian Forster anymore, so you're seducing Leo Forster instead. Vivian Marsh, you really are desperate to marry into a rich family. Do you really think the Forsters will accept a girl with your background? They're just playing with you." "Miss Vance," Vivian finally couldn't take it anymore and interrupted her. "I don't know if we've had any issues in the past, but my relationship with Uncle Julian and Leo is not what you think. I like Leo, and it has nothing to do with whether he's from a rich family or not." Sylvia was stunned. She stared at Vivian for a long moment, only then realizing something was off about her. "You," Vivian said, "I was in a car accident and lost some of my memories. Is there some misunderstanding between us?" Sylvia almost laughed out loud, so she had amnesia. And she thought the person she liked was Leo. Remembering Julian's cold attitude toward her that day, a wave of vengeful satisfaction rose in Sylvia's heart. A cruel glint flashed in her eyes. She slowly approached Vivian and said, word by word, "It was your uncle who told me. He said you tried to seduce him before, and he was so disgusted that he wishes he never had to see your face again for the rest of his life." Vivian froze on the spot, feeling as if she had been plunged into an icy cavern. No, that's impossible. She had seduced Julian, and she had been rejected. Was that the reason he went to the United States? Seeing her trembling all over, Sylvia sneered and left without another word. That's right. She didn't want Julian to have it easy, and she didn't want Vivian to have it easy either. When Leo and Ryan came out, they saw Vivian standing there in a daze. They called out to her, and she finally snapped back to reality. Her eyes were still red. Leo immediately asked her nervously, "What's wrong with you?" Vivian shook her head. "I'm sorry, I suddenly don't feel well. I won't be having lunch with you guys. I'm leaving now." With that, she turned to leave. Leo was worried she might have some after effects from the car accident and was about to follow her. "I'll take you to the hospital." Having just learned about what she might have done in the past, Vivian had no face to see Leo and hurriedly shook her head. "No need, I'll be fine after some rest." She didn't give Leo another chance to speak and ran off in a hurry. When she returned to the dorm, her roommates were not there. Vivian lay alone in bed, her mind a complete blank. What Sylvia had said was like a thunderbolt from a clear sky. Why on earth had she done such a thing in the past? The more Vivian thought about it, the more painful it became, and the more ashamed she felt to face Leo. After that day, she always avoided Leo, no longer happily approaching him when they met at school. Leo didn't understand what was wrong with her until Julian returned from the United States ahead of schedule. He didn't go home or to the company after getting off the plane. Instead, he immediately drove to Rongcheng University. During his time away, he had thought through many things. He thought that if he stayed away, he could stop thinking about Vivian. But in New York, every day, whether at work or at social events, his mind was filled with her face. He would involuntarily recall how she looked leaning against the windowsill on New Year's Eve, so gentle and beautiful. The more he tried to calm down, the less calm he became. The urge to see her could no longer be controlled, so he ended his work early and returned to Rongcheng. However, when Julian stood at the school gate and called Vivian, she didn't pick up. He made many calls, but there was no answer. A bad feeling suddenly arose in Julian's heart. He hurried into the school and ran into Leo. "Uncle Julian, why are you back so early?" Julian didn't have time to explain and just asked, "Where is Vivi?" Leo also shook his head. "I haven't seen her for days. I don't know what's wrong with her lately. She seems to be avoiding me." Hearing Leo's words, combined with the unanswered calls, a bad premonition suddenly arose in Julian's heart. Vivian was not the type to make people worry for no reason. Something must have happened. He thought for a moment, then had his assistant find the contact information for Vivian's department head. He finally learned that she had taken a week's leave and gone home. Arriving again at the somewhat dilapidated apartment building, his state of mind was completely different from that of New Year's Eve. This time, Julian didn't hesitate and immediately went upstairs to knock on the Marshes' door. It was her grandmother who opened the door. Seeing Julian, Alina looked as if she had seen a savior. "Julian, you're finally here. Please go and talk to Vivi. She refuses to go to the hospital." Julian's dark eyes deepened, and he immediately walked into Vivian's room. The bed was just a small mountain under the covers. Vivian lay in bed with her eyes closed and her brows furrowed, her usually fair face flushed red. His heart clenched. He immediately went over and held her hand, only to find that it was unusually hot. "Vivi, Vivi!" Alina also came in. "This girl had a fever last night, and she's been locking herself in her room and refusing to come out. Oh, it's making me so anxious." Julian reached out to feel her forehead. It was indeed very hot. His brow furrowed tightly. He immediately lifted the covers and picked Vivian up in his arms. "Don't worry, I'll take her to the hospital right now." However, the girl in his arms was not cooperative. Leaving the warmth of the blanket, she felt a biting cold wind on her body and couldn't stop shivering. Her body uncontrollably tried to snuggle into his warm embrace. She groggily opened her eyes, but upon seeing Julian's side profile, her whole body suddenly stiffened. Julian felt the girl in his arms start to struggle, and his hold on her tightened. "Let go of me, let go." Julian's voice deepened, a hint of anger in his tone. "Stop making a fuss." He had always been a man of great authority. This serious demeanor indeed frightened Vivian. Perhaps she was also somewhat delirious from the fever, for she soon stopped struggling and fell into a deep sleep. When she woke up again, she was already in the hospital. An IV was attached to her right hand. Julian was sitting by the bed, just like the scene after she woke up from her car accident. For some reason, several strange yet familiar images flashed through her otherwise blank mind. It was her and Julian in a messy bedroom. After seeing the person next to her, she had hastily put on her clothes and fled. The memory ended there, with no context. But as Vivian endured the piercing pain in her head, her heart filled with despair. Sylvia hadn't lied to her. She had really seduced Julian, and it had even gone so far as a tear slid from the corner of her eye. Vivian stared blankly at the ceiling, until a warm hand reached out to wipe away her tears. Vivian looked up and met Julian's dark eyes. "Why are you crying? Are you uncomfortable somewhere?" His tone was very gentle, but to Vivian's ears, it only intensified her inner conflict and pain. Didn't Sylvia say he never wanted to see her again? Yes, he must hate her. A student he sponsored had the audacity to shamelessly seduce him, while also being in love with his nephew. What would Julian think of her? He must think she was a vain woman greedy for the Forster family's wealth. His concern for her now was probably just out of a sense of responsibility. After all, he had sponsored her for many years. The more Vivian thought, the more she felt an overwhelming sense of shame, and the more her tears flowed. Julian thought she was in great pain and was about to call a doctor, but the crying girl suddenly called out to him. "Uncle Julian?" Julian stopped turning and looked at her. Vivian sobbed, having made a decision in her heart. "Uncle Julian, from now on, let's not see each other again." Her eyes were red, her voice hoarse, yet her tone was solemn and serious. Julian's dark eyes deepened as he looked at her silently. He never would have thought this would be the first thing she'd say to him. For a moment, a flicker of unease crossed his mind. He even wondered if her memory had returned. Was that why she wanted nothing to do with him anymore? After a long moment, he heard himself ask, "Why?" Vivian tried her best to calm down. She thought Julian, bound by responsibility and perhaps feeling sorry for her after the accident, hadn't abandoned her despite his dislike. Now that she knew about the past, how could she have the face to stay by his side? She was silent for a long time before finally saying, "I just feel that I'm grown up now. There's no reason for me to need your help with everything like I used to." She thought she had found a perfect reason for Julian to stop looking after her. But to Julian, these words sounded like she was trying to draw a line between them again. He looked at her intently. "Grown up enough to let yourself get a fever of 104 and pass out. If I hadn't come back today, what were you and your grandmother going to do? She's an old woman. Could she have brought you to the hospital? You knew you were sick, so why didn't you come to the hospital earlier? Do you care so little about your own body? And now you're telling me you're grown up? Does a grown-up take care of themselves like this?" His tone was somewhat stern. Vivian lay in bed, silent, her long lashes trembling as if tears might fall at any moment. She bit her lip with a strange stubbornness. "Anyway, I will take care of myself from now on." Julian looked at her and finally sighed helplessly, then slowly sat down by the bed again. "All right, stop talking nonsense. I am your uncle. It's my duty to take care of you." Vivian didn't answer, but a wave of bitterness washed over her heart. It's my duty to take care of you. That must be why Julian had always cared for her so much. Even though he didn't want to see her, he was forced to take care of her. In the end, Julian didn't leave, nor did he take Vivian's words about not wanting to see him again seriously. Instead, he took meticulous care of her for a night. The next day, after her fever had completely subsided, Julian finally answered his assistant's call. The assistant had made countless work calls to him, never imagining that his work-obsessed boss would go missing right after returning to the country. After hanging up, Julian helped Vivian out of the hospital room. "Rest well after you're discharged. The doctor said your injuries from the car accident haven't fully healed yet. Take care of your body, don't overexert yourself." He instructed her, sentence by sentence, like a father. Her heart was filled with a mix of sorrow and gratitude. Even though her rational mind told her to stay away from Julian, her heart couldn't help but rely on him more and more. It was as if relying on him was her instinct. "I know," she answered slowly. Seeing that she still seemed preoccupied, Julian patted her head. "Study hard and don't think about anything else, okay?" Vivian nodded, and they left the hospital together. After dropping Vivian off at Rongcheng University, Julian drove back to his company. Vivian walked on campus, her mind full of thoughts. Although Julian had told her not to think about anything, how could she not? As she walked, she inadvertently looked up and saw Leo standing ahead. In front of him was a girl, whom Vivian also recognized as the campus belle from the Foreign Languages Department. The girl's eyes seemed to be filled with tears. She was holding a box of chocolates and offering it to Leo, but he didn't take it. Instead, he rejected her very coldly. It seemed she was confessing her feelings to Leo. Vivian stood where she was, watching with a calm expression. Then she saw the girl reach out and hug Leo. Leo seemed startled by her sudden action and only reacted a few seconds later. By the time he tried to push her away, the girl had already let go and run off in tears. Leo turned around with a frustrated look on his face, only to see Vivian standing about 10 meters away. A flash of panic crossed his eyes, and he quickly walked over. He subconsciously tried to explain, "Just now, she was confessing to me, I didn't pay her any mind." Young Master Forster was clearly not good at explanations, his words stumbling. Vivian shook her head. "It's fine, but Leo didn't believe her. I really didn't pay her any mind. She's the one who insisted on hugging me." Just then, a few men in sportswear behind them shouted at Leo, "Brother Forster, what are you doing? Come play basketball. We're just waiting for you, hurry up." Leo frowned, about to tell them to shut up, but Vivian said, "It's okay, you should go play. I need to go back to my dorm." Her completely nonchalant attitude actually made Leo a little angry. His young master temper flared up, and he turned without another word and walked onto the basketball court with the others. Vivian watched his back for a few moments, then headed towards the girls' dormitory. She herself found it strange. Didn't she like Leo? But when she saw another girl confessing to him and even hugging him, she felt nothing at all. It was as if it had nothing to do with her. Instead, what she was thinking about most now was still Julian. Thinking of him filled her with a sense of conflict. This was the first time since her amnesia that she so desperately wished to regain her memory, to know what had happened in the past. Meanwhile, at the Forster Group, the assistant walked into the top-floor CEO's office and reported on work item by item. Julian was wearing a pair of gold-rimmed glasses he didn't often wear, casually looking at the report in his hand. After the assistant finished, he seemed to remember something. "The Mingwen Hotel is having a grand opening ball on Friday night. Mr. Jai sent you an invitation, but you have another dinner on Saturday. Should I decline for you?" A ball? Julian was taken aback and suddenly looked up. Having worked for him for years, the assistant knew from his boss's reaction that he was interested in the ball. He kept his eyes lowered and immediately said, "Or I can postpone the original dinner for you." Julian only thought for 3 seconds before nodding. "Yes, postpone the original dinner. Tell Mr. Jai I will attend the ball." "Understood. Also, have another gown custom made for me," the assistant said casually, "still according to Miss Vivi's measurements, right?" He said this very naturally, as if he had long known why Julian wanted to attend the ball. Feeling his boss's gaze on him, the assistant gave a sheepish smile. "After all, you've only ever had gowns custom made for Miss Vivi." The dress Vivian wore to the last business reception was one he had specially commissioned. The assistant had long known that Miss Vivian was special to Mr. Forster. This was even more certain after her car accident. Not just anyone could make Mr. Forster fly for over 10 hours just to see her on New Year's Eve. So, who else could this dress be for? Julian didn't refute him, only told him to get it done quickly. After the assistant left, he sat alone in his office, recalling how Vivian looked when she attended the reception with him last time. He had always known how much she wanted to be his first date. But at that time, Julian was only focused on pushing her away, not daring to face his own heart. So, to make her give up, he had deliberately brought Sylvia. Even though he knew it was an event Vivian had looked forward to for a long time, even though he knew it would make her sad, he still did it. Julian closed his eyes, a wave of guilt washing over him. Perhaps, from that moment on, she had already been disappointed in him. Now, Julian wanted to do everything he could to make it up to her. A few days later, on Friday evening, Julian appeared at the school gate. He called her to come out, and only then did she learn that she was going to a ball with him. For some reason, hearing the word ball, a strange, tingling sensation rose in her heart, as if it was something she had been looking forward to for a long time. But she still asked, "Uncle Julian, why are you asking me to go with you?" Julian smiled. "To check if you've been slacking off on the dance lessons I arranged for you all these years." Over the years, Julian had raised her like a daughter, even personally finding a dance teacher for her. Only then did Vivian vaguely remember that she did seem to know how to dance. In the end, she got into the car with him. Leo had been on his way to buy something when he saw Vivian getting into Julian's car. Julian was holding her hand. Neither of them realized how intimate and natural their actions were, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Leo froze on the spot, his expression darkening. Arriving at the Mingwen Hotel, Vivian entered the ballroom on Julian's arm. Many people were already inside. In Vivian's memory, this was her first time at such an event, and she was understandably nervous. Fortunately, Julian was there. He secretly squeezed her left hand and whispered in her ear, "Don't be nervous, just follow me." His voice seemed to have a magical quality, and it really did calm her heart. Julian rarely attended such recreational events, and many eyes were on the two of them. Who is that woman? She looks different from the date Julian brought last time, doesn't she? Wasn't the last one his girlfriend? Did Mr. Forster change partners so quickly? Not at all. I was at that last reception too. That woman clearly wasn't in that kind of relationship with Mr. Forster. He spent the whole time networking with business partners and barely paid her any attention. A group of people gathered, discussing. But one of the socialites, upon seeing Vivian's face, had a look of complete surprise. This was the same person who had mocked Vivian and Sylvia at the Forster party. That time, Julian had publicly defended Sylvia and hadn't even looked at Vivian. She had thought Vivian was just an insignificant person, but now Julian was bringing her to a ball. Who on earth was this woman? While they were wildly guessing Vivian's identity, Vivian, of course, couldn't hear them. But as she walked, her expression suddenly became strange and her pace slowed. Julian quickly noticed her abnormality and asked softly, "What's wrong?" Vivian said with some difficulty, "It's nothing, I'm just not used to wearing high heels." As she spoke, another sharp pain came from her heel. Julian looked down and saw that her heel was already red and raw. The shoes clearly didn't fit well. His brows furrowed. "Why didn't you say so earlier?" Vivian was too embarrassed to say anything. Besides, she hadn't brought a change of shoes. If she said something, was she supposed to take them off in front of all these high society people? That would be too humiliating. To her surprise, before she could even finish the thought, Julian led her to a sofa in a nearby rest area. He had Vivian sit down, then knelt and personally removed her shoes. He then began to gently massage her sore ankle. It tickled, but more than that, she was incredibly embarrassed. "Uncle Julian," Julian looked up at her. "Yes, what is it?" "Is it all right for me to take my shoes off here?" Julian paused. "There's nothing wrong with it. Wait here, I'll have someone bring another pair of shoes over." Her heart jumped. She was about to say he didn't need to go to the trouble, but Julian had already pulled out his phone and made a call. Feeling the many gazes fixed on them, Vivian's earlobes turned bright red. She wasn't stupid. She knew that even taking her shoes off in public wouldn't draw this much attention. What truly had everyone stunned was the sight of the esteemed CEO of the Forster Group bending down in public to massage a young girl's foot. Some people couldn't believe their eyes, muttering that they must have had too much to drink. Julian Forster, a man born into privilege, a figure at the very top of Rongcheng's power structure, was willingly kneeling for a girl? Who on earth was she? Vivian could feel more and more people staring, and she lowered her head further and further. Finally, she couldn't bear it anymore and gave Julian a little push. "Uncle Julian?" You should probably sit down." Julian seemed completely oblivious to her discomfort, his hands still gently kneading her feet. "Does your foot feel better?" Vivian wanted to say it was fine, but his massage felt so good. "Next time, if you don't like wearing high heels, you don't have to. There aren't so many rules." He seemed to completely disregard the unwritten rules of such events. Watching the serious, gentle way he massaged her feet, something suddenly exploded in Vivian's heart. She almost instinctively tried to suppress the strange feeling rising within her. "No, this isn't right." Sylvia's words immediately echoed in her mind. "You tried to seduce him before, and he was so disgusted that he wishes he never had to see your face again for the rest of his life. Vivian, he's your Uncle Julian. His kindness is only from the standpoint of an elder. Besides, isn't Leo the one you like? You already made a mistake before you lost your memory. Are you going to make it again?" As her thoughts churned in confusion, the person delivering the shoes arrived. Julian opened the box for her. Although this pair also had a slight heel, they were much better than the last. He personally helped her put them on. Once they were on, just as he was about to say something, Vivian spoke up. "Uncle Julian, I need to go to the restroom." With that, she stumbled away, practically fleeing towards the restroom. In front of the sinks, Vivian repeatedly splashed cold water on her face, trying to wake herself up, to extinguish the nameless fire that had been lit in her heart. That momentary flutter of her heart had filled her with a sense of self-loathing. "Vivian, get a grip. That's your Uncle Julian. He isn't the one you like. The person you like is Leo Forster." With that thought, her heart finally calmed a little. A few minutes later, Vivian pulled a few paper towels to dry her face and finally left the restroom. When she returned to the ballroom, she saw a woman standing next to Julian from a distance. She had an air of wealth and nobility. The woman was holding a glass of champagne and smiling as she spoke to him. At a glance, they looked perfectly matched. Vivian's heart sank for no reason, a wave of inexplicable loss washing over her. She hadn't even felt this way when she saw Leo with another girl. Just then, Julian saw her from across the room. He immediately said something to the woman and started walking over. Vivian suppressed the strange emotions in her heart and forced a smile as he approached. She didn't plan to ask who the woman was. It would be strange, as if she cared. Besides, she had no right to ask. Vivian planned to let the moment pass in silence. To her surprise, Julian had other plans. That was the owner of the Mingwen Hotel. She was thanking me for attending the ball. After he spoke, Vivian was momentarily stunned. Is he explaining to me? Is he afraid I'll misunderstand? But why would he need to explain? To him, I'm just a junior. Vivian's heart thumped wildly in her chest, and she didn't know how to respond. In the end, all she could manage was an "oh," and said nothing more. Just then, Julian gently took her hand again. The dancing is about to start. Shall we? Feeling her hand enveloped by his larger one, she couldn't help but tremble again. He led her onto the dance floor. As the figures around them swirled, Vivian's heart slowly began to calm. Julian's arm was around her waist as they began to dance slowly. His movements were gentle, and he intentionally matched her rhythm. They were very close. Vivian's chin rested on his shoulder, and for a fleeting moment, she felt as if they were a pair of lovers locked in a tight embrace. But then, the string of reason in her mind pulled taut again. It forced her to recognize who the person in front of her was. After the dance ended, Vivian was about to look up and say something when she suddenly felt a fleeting, warm touch on her forehead. She froze instantly. Did he just kiss my forehead? Her eyes trembled as she looked up at him. Uncle Julian? The deep affection in Julian's eyes hadn't had time to recede, but he was afraid of scaring her. He could only say, "You danced very well." That was for encouragement. Vivian swallowed hard and said nothing more. Her mind was still in a daze all the way until he dropped her off at the university. Julian, on the other hand, was in a good mood. However, his good mood only lasted until he returned to the Forster mansion. Leo had returned at some point and had even let himself into Julian's study. "Uncle Julian, where did you take Vivian Marsh today?" he asked. Julian looked at the probing in his nephew's eyes and said directly, "I took her to a ball." "A ball?" Leo frowned. "Uncle Julian, what exactly are you playing at? You know Vivian used to be head over heels in love with you. Now that she's finally forgotten those painful memories, why are you doing this? Are you planning to make her suffer all over again?" In Leo's mind, there was no way Julian would ever reciprocate Vivian's feelings. Therefore, his current kindness was completely unnecessary. What if she remembered, or fell in love with him all over again? Why give her hope for something that could never happen? Julian spoke calmly. "I won't make her suffer again." "How can you be so sure? After you rejected her last time, she got into that car accident. I won't reject her again." Julian cut him off, and his next words left Leo utterly frozen. "Uncle Julian, what do you mean?" Julian decided not to hide it from him any longer. His voice was deep as he spoke. "I mean, I like Vivi." Boom! It was as if a clap of thunder had exploded over Leo's head. He was so shocked he could barely speak. He stood there, rigid, for a long time before finally stammering, You like Vivian Marsh?" "That's right." Leo still felt like he was dreaming. He didn't know if he had gone crazy, or if his famously self-controlled uncle had. "But that's Vivian Marsh. She calls you Uncle Julian. She's the student you sponsor. How can you like her?" Although Vivian wasn't related to them by blood, Leo had always assumed Julian treated her so well because he saw her as family. Hearing him say he liked her was as difficult to accept as hearing something that violated all moral principles. "I know our relationship is complicated. That's why I refused to accept her before. But now I've thought it through. I like her and I can't accept losing her. So I'm preparing to win her back." He said it all so clearly that Leo was at a loss for words. So, his uncle had always liked Vivian, too. He had only refrained from accepting her because of their respective roles. And the car accident had finally made him see his own heart clearly. As his mind reeled in chaos, Julian spoke again. "I recall you saying that you like Vivi." Leo stiffened but still jutted out his chin and nodded. This was a nightmare. An uncle and nephew in love with the same woman. If word got out, the Forsters would become a laughingstock. Technically speaking, the two of them were now romantic rivals. Once Leo accepted that his uncle also liked Vivian, his gaze towards him became complicated. But it was obvious Julian didn't see him as a rival. "Vivi won't like you," he stated flatly. A surge of defiance rose in Leo's heart. He wanted to retort, "How would you know? The amnesiac Vivian thinks she likes me right now," but then he remembered the reason she thought she liked him, the ring that was meant for Julian, and his confidence instantly deflated. "I'll work hard to pursue her," Leo said. Julian just shook his head. "You practically grew up together. If Vivi was going to like you, it wouldn't have taken until now. You were so arrogant around her before. It's only because she has amnesia that your relationship has improved. Once she gets her memory back, do you really think she'll still accept you?" As expected, Leo's eyes instantly dimmed. He knew it himself, actually. Before he understood his own feelings, he had always lorded his young master status over her, acting high and mighty. Back then, Vivian must have really disliked him, right? But Leo was still unwilling to give up. "And what about you, Uncle Julian? You hurt her so many times in the past. What makes you think she'll choose you when she gets her memory back?" The words struck a nerve, and Julian fell silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, "Then I will wait until she is willing to forgive me." When Leo left, he was still filled with unwillingness, but he knew his chances against his uncle were slim to none. "Uncle Julian," Leo said, turning back at the door, "whether you're serious this time or not, don't let her get hurt again." Julian looked up and spoke earnestly. "I know." Vivian spent the next few days in a daze, unable to stop thinking about the kiss Julian had placed on her forehead at the ball. The tingling sensation seemed to linger for days. It even made her feel a strange sense of guilt whenever she ran into Leo at school. They weren't even a couple, but Vivian found she couldn't quite face him. Fortunately, Leo didn't seem to want to see her much either lately. They had run into each other several times, but he would leave after just a few words. This actually made Vivian feel a little relieved. On Friday afternoon, she left the campus, wanting to buy a bowl of wonton soup from the food street outside. To get to the food street, she had to cross a road. Vivian was lost in thought and didn't pay much attention to the traffic. When the light turned green, she started to walk. She didn't notice that just as she stepped off the curb, a white car suddenly stomped on the gas and sped directly towards her. It was only when she heard the screams of the people around her that Vivian turned to see the car hurtling toward her. Through the blurry car window, she saw Sylvia Vance's twisted and frenzied face. Memories of the car accident from months ago flashed in her mind. Vivian froze on the spot, momentarily forgetting to run. A sharp pain shot through her head, so intense that her vision flashed white. She clutched her head and staggered backward, only to be tripped by something unknown. Just as the car was about to hit her, another vehicle suddenly swerved in, blocking the white car's path. The two cars collided violently with a deafening crash. Bang! Vivian's whole body trembled, and she fainted completely. The car that had blocked Sylvia's was Julian's. He scrambled out of the car and immediately gathered Vivian into his arms. "Vivi? Vivi," she was unresponsive. Panicked, Julian scooped her up and was about to rush to the hospital. Just then, his assistant and bodyguards ran over. Julian suddenly stopped, his face contorted with fury as he looked back at the white car Sylvia had been driving. "Don't let her get away." Leaving those words behind, he ran toward the hospital with Vivian in his arms. Vivian wasn't actually injured this time. The doctor said she had fainted mainly from shock, and because the head injury from her last accident hadn't fully healed. But Julian had been terrified. He held her hand and didn't leave her bedside for a moment before she woke up. Thinking back to how close Sylvia had come to hitting her, Julian felt a fear he had never experienced in his life. If he had been a second later, would he have lost Vivian completely this time? "I'm sorry, it's my fault, I didn't protect you. Vivi, I'll never let you get hurt again. It's all my fault," he apologized over and over, as if not just for what happened today. After what felt like an eternity, the fingers of the unconscious person on the bed twitched. Julian, who had been holding her hand tightly, felt it immediately. He looked at her face excitedly and saw that Vivian was indeed awake, though her face was still pale. He leaned down and hugged her, his entire body trembling. But the next second, he felt the person beneath him push him away with force. Vivian looked at him, her eyes no longer held the reliance he was used to, only coldness and distance. "Uncle Julian, you shouldn't be this close to me." The moment he met her gaze, Julian seemed to understand everything. He looked at her and said, You remember everything?" It was phrased as a question, but his tone was one of certainty. Vivian looked back at him, her face pale, and didn't answer for a long time. The stabbing pain in her head continued. She never thought that Sylvia's accident would instead stimulate her brain and cause her to regain her memories early. She looked utterly detached. As she tried to sit up, a hand reached out to support her waist and help her. Vivian's body stiffened, and she instinctively tried to pull away. Memories of Julian flooded her mind. His coldness, his neglect, his distance, his cruel words, all plunged into her heart like daggers. But the memories from her time with amnesia also forced their way into her mind. He seemed to have changed so much during this time, but Vivian didn't want to dwell on why he had changed. The words he had said to her before the car accident were clear enough. She shouldn't shamelessly cling to his side anymore. Just then, a glass of water was offered to her. Julian held the cup to her lips, looked at her slightly chapped lips, and spoke softly. "Have some water." Vivian glanced up at him. She didn't refuse, but she didn't let him feed her either. She took the cup and drank half of it in one go. The cool, sweet water soothed her dry throat. After she finished drinking, Vivian didn't look at him and tried to get out of bed on her own. "I'm fine now, I'm leaving the hospital." She didn't want to be in the same room with him. Not for a minute, not for a second. Julian saw the resistance in her face as clear as day and sighed silently. Just as Vivian was about to leave, her wrist was grabbed. Julian pushed the person who had just left the bed back onto it, his body moving closer and closer to hers. "Vivi, just listen to me first, okay?" His voice was soft, almost coaxing, but Vivian wasn't having it. She stubbornly turned her head away, refusing to even look at him. "Uncle Julian, there's nothing for us to talk about. I'm grateful you saved me just now, but I need to get back to my studies." Julian almost forcibly turned her head to face him. "I know you're angry with me. What happened in the past was my fault. Will you give me a chance to explain, please?" What was there to explain? Hadn't he already made things clear to her? The memory of that day was still so painful Vivian could hardly bear it. Therefore, she now refused any communication with him. "There's nothing to explain. I understand that liking you in the past was me overreaching. I told you I would never bother you again." Julian looked at her gravely, feeling that every word she said now was a boomerang flying back to hit him. Suddenly, he gripped her hand. Vivian was pulled forward uncontrollably, falling into his embrace. Julian held her tightly. "Don't say that. I'm begging you, don't say that." The man who had always been so proud and self-possessed now had a tremor in his voice. Vivian was suddenly stunned. What was wrong with him? Didn't he try everything he could to get away from her before? Didn't he say he had no feelings for her, that he only sponsored her because of Sylvia? Sylvia, right. Thinking of that woman made Vivian even more confused. Why did she want to hit her with a car? Just then, Julian's assistant burst into the hospital room. "Mr. Forster, the police are here. They said they need to take Sylvia." He stopped mid-sentence when he saw the two embracing in the room and wisely shut his mouth. Hearing the assistant's voice, Vivian immediately came to her senses and pushed the man in front of her away. Julian, however, stood up calmly, his expression turning serious. Just as he was about to speak, he felt a tug on his clothes. He was taken aback and looked down. Vivian spoke softly, "I want to see Sylvia Vance." Sylvia was being held temporarily in a small room at the hospital. When Vivian entered, she was already in handcuffs. "Why did you try to hit me?" Vivian looked at her calmly. The hatred in Sylvia's eyes was something she couldn't comprehend. Why did she hate her so much? Suddenly, Vivian remembered the misleading things Sylvia had told her when she had amnesia. What was the reason for all this? Sylvia glared at her, her face contorted. The jealousy in her heart had completely shattered her composed facade. Why did she try to hit Vivian? Because she hated her. Of course, as it turned out, Sylvia had recently run into the socialite who had mocked her at the reception. Before, they had all thought Sylvia had Julian's backing and hadn't dared to do anything to her. But after the last ball, that socialite had keenly sensed that the person truly important to Julian was the obscure little girl by his side. At the ball, she had secretly taken photos of Julian massaging Vivian's foot, changing her shoes, and dancing with her. She had deliberately shown them to Sylvia, and the group of socialites had mocked Sylvia mercilessly, taunting her that even if she tried to climb the social ladder, she was destined to fail this time. Sylvia had already been rejected by Julian. She had originally wanted to go back to her old boyfriend, only to find he was already with an arranged match his family had introduced. Having lost on both fronts, she then saw Vivian nestled so happily in Julian's arms. Of course, she was consumed by jealousy. Why? Why did Vivian get to be happy? They were the same kind of person, both from humble beginnings, both needing someone else to sponsor their education. Why did Vivian get Julian's favor? She couldn't accept it. Jealousy can drive a person mad. In the end, she had committed this terrible act. Vivian Marsh, don't you be so smug. Do you really think Julian is that good to you? Even if he likes you now, do you think he'll actually marry you into the Forster family? Ha 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 ha, don't you dream of it. You'll end up with the same fate as me, destined to be abandoned. Vivian frowned as Sylvia finished her crazed shouting. The police then came in and took Sylvia away. Vivian stood rooted to the spot, Sylvia's shrill words echoing in her mind. Julian likes her? That was the biggest joke she had ever heard in her life. How could Julian possibly like her? He clearly hated her guts. Just then, the sound of steady footsteps approached from behind. Julian walked to her side. Seeing Vivian's distracted expression, he thought Sylvia must have said something she shouldn't have. What did she say to you? Hearing his voice, Vivian's hand instinctively flinched. She lifted her watery eyes and looked at him quietly. Julian looked back at her just as quietly. Vivian suddenly felt that she couldn't see through him anymore. Perhaps she never could. After a long moment, she finally couldn't hold it in any longer and said, "Sylvia said you like me." It wasn't a question, just a statement of fact. Because deep down, Vivian didn't believe it. She had once loved Julian so passionately, so sincerely, so single-mindedly. She had poured all the secret love of her youth onto him, giving him everything, including her body. But all she got in return was him saying, "I'm sorry about that night. If you can forget it, I can compensate you. Vivi, stop liking me. You should like a boy your own age." She would probably remember those words forever. He had put a price tag on her feelings, trying to use compensation to make her stop loving him. She stared at Julian, her eyes bright, expecting him to say, as he always had, that it was impossible for him to like her. But this time, Julian didn't. After a moment of silence, he spoke seriously, word by word. "That's right, Vivi, I like you. I've always liked you. I was always too afraid to face these feelings, so I did a lot of wrong things and hurt you badly. I always felt there was too much separating us, that you were so much younger than me, that I couldn't be with you. But it wasn't until you lost your memory and completely forgot me that I finally understood how important you are to me, and finally understood how cowardly and timid I was." Vivian stared at him, stunned. "But you said before that you sponsored me because of Sylvia." "I only said that to make you give up on me. It was deliberate. Vivi, from the moment I first saw you among all those children, I felt we were fated. It was as if some divine force was tying us together. I helped you, I cared for you, never because of anyone else, only because of you." Vivian was utterly speechless. Hearing Julian's confession was even more shocking than the words she had heard before her accident. She stood there in a daze for a long time, unable to process it. Julian carefully observed her reaction and finally added, "Vivi, I know it's too late to be saying all this now. Much of the harm I've done to you can't be undone. But from now on, I will do my best to make it up to you. Please, give your uncle one more chance, okay?" He reached out, trying to take her hand, but just as he was about to touch her palm, she pushed him away forcefully. Vivian's voice was choked with emotion. "No. Uncle Julian, I told you, I don't like you anymore." With that, she rushed past Julian and ran out. When he couldn't see her, the corners of her eyes were already red. She didn't know why she wanted to cry. It certainly wasn't because her years of secret love had finally been reciprocated. It was too late. Everything was too late. Why was it that when he didn't want to be with her, he could be cold and ignore her feelings, but now that he wanted to be with her, he was begging her for a chance? Did he ever give her a chance back then? Vivian ran while wiping away her tears. She didn't want to give him a chance, and she didn't want to repeat her past mistakes. She left the hospital and took a taxi straight back to the university. Julian didn't follow her. It wasn't until Vivian got out of the taxi that she received a text from him. "Rest well. I won't push you. You can take your time to think about it." He sounded so calm and composed, as if he knew she would eventually say yes. Vivian hated that about him. Fuming, she typed out a message and sent it back. "I don't want to think about it. After sending it, she swiftly blocked Julian's number. Only then did she feel slightly better. In his car, Julian was considering whether to call Vivian. He knew she had just regained her memory and was at a point where she was least able to accept him. It really wasn't a good time to confess, but since she had asked, he didn't want to hide it any longer. He had been hiding for long enough and didn't want to waste another second. Just as he was about to dial, he received Vivian's reply. Seeing those 4 decisive words, Julian frowned and tried to call her without hesitation, only to find he had been blocked. This was probably the first time in his life that the esteemed heir of the Forster family had been blocked. Julian was so taken aback that he stared at the unresponsive number for a few seconds before finally understanding what she meant. She really wants to cut all ties with me. Mr. Forster pressed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. Not even the most difficult business deal had ever made him this frustrated. Oh well, he thought. I'm just paying for the mistakes I made in the past. After returning to campus, Vivian ran into a panting Leo, who was rushing toward her. Leo had just heard about her near accident. He checked Vivian over from head to toe, and only after confirming she wasn't hurt did he let out a long sigh of relief. Vivian Marsh, what is wrong with you? Can't you be more careful and pay attention to your safety? You're in trouble every other day. Are you trying to scare someone to death? Young Master Forster was always like this, expressing his concern from a high horse, but Vivian still wasn't used to him caring about her. Remembering how she had treated him as the person she liked during her amnesia, she suddenly felt awkward meeting him. She spoke a bit unnaturally, "Leo, thank you." Seeing her reaction, Leo's brain worked faster than ever before. The old Vivian wouldn't have spoken to him so distantly and politely. He blinked. "You're Vivian Marsh." It was a nonsensical question. Who else could she be? But only Leo understood what he meant. Vivian nodded, looking confused. Leo probed further. "You remembered what happened before?" Vivian was silent for a moment, then nodded again. "So that's it." Leo's heart deflated for no reason. Just as he'd thought, the Vivian with her memories back would never be as close to him as before. These past few months had felt like a dream to him. "Leo, thank you for taking care of me during this time. I'm so sorry for mistaking you for my boyfriend." She apologized formally. A flicker of bitterness, hard to detect, crossed Leo's eyes. Then he put on his young master airs again. "HMPH, you'd better know it. If it wasn't for the fact that you had amnesia after the accident, this young master wouldn't have been so nice to you. And you dared to imagine I was your boyfriend? Keep dreaming." The Leo she was familiar with was back, but Vivian felt that something was different. She didn't dwell on it. She knew that although Leo was stubborn on the surface, he wasn't a bad person. It was reasonable that he had become gentler towards her after her accident. "Thank you." After that, there seemed to be nothing left for them to say. They stood facing each other in silence for about half a minute. Just then, one of Leo's friends called out to him from behind. "Forster, let's go play basketball." "Coming," he immediately replied. "I'm going, you get some rest." Before leaving, he couldn't help but add another word of advice. Vivian smiled and nodded. They turned and walked away at the same time. Vivian didn't see the usual arrogance on Leo's face had been replaced by something else. The next day, Vivian went home. Her grandmother was overjoyed to learn that her memory had returned, but then she remembered something and asked, "Then what about you and Julian?" Vivian was peeling an orange for her grandmother. Hearing his name, her hands paused. Then she said, "Grandma, the past is in the past. From now on, I will only see him as my uncle." Her voice was firm, but after hearing it, her grandmother sighed. "Oh, Vivi. Actually, the day you had that high fever, when Julian came to carry you to the hospital, I could see that you were different to him. Especially after you lost your memory, he became just like when you were a child, so caring and good to you. Although I worry, seeing that there's someone who can take care of you makes my heart happy. But you too." Vivian understood what her grandmother meant. On one hand, she was incredibly dependent on Julian, both emotionally and in life. But on the other hand, this dependence was something that shouldn't have existed after she grew up. For some reason, her nose started to sting again. She silently finished peeling the orange and placed it in her grandmother's palm. "Grandma, don't worry. I will take good care of myself. After going through so much, I've grown up and I've figured things out." Billionaire Marsh looked at her with her aged eyes, lost in thought. She didn't say anything more, just nodded. After spending a little more time with her grandmother, Vivian went downstairs to head back to school. Just as she reached the ground floor, she saw Julian's luxury car parked brazenly. The next second, Julian got out of the car. Vivian could no longer pretend not to see him. He walked over. "Why did you block me?" Vivian pursed her lips and didn't speak. Julian had just finished an all-nighter at the office. Hearing she had gone home, he had rushed over to intercept her. After all that effort, the girl wouldn't even talk to him. He took a step closer to her, his voice tinged with fatigue. "It's almost 4. Are you hungry? Let me take you to dinner." Vivian instinctively took a step back and opened her mouth to refuse. "I'm not hungry. I need to go back to school." Her refusals were getting more and more decisive. Julian let her have that one. "Then I'll drive you back to school." "No need, I can get back on my own." But Julian didn't let her. He stepped directly in her path. "Vivi, I don't mind making a scene downstairs from your home, as long as you don't mind your grandmother or the neighbors seeing." Vivian glared at him, but she was genuinely worried that a scene would draw attention, especially from her grandmother. Reluctantly, she got into the car. Because she was unwilling, Vivian deliberately sat in the back seat instead of the front, treating him like a chauffeur. Julian gave a wry smile to himself but didn't say anything. On the way, she stared out the window, pretending to look at the scenery, and didn't say a word. It was Julian who broke the silence. "Remember to go for your hospital checkup in a couple of days. Your previous injuries haven't healed properly, and you're always so reckless. It would be bad if it leaves a lasting problem." Vivian mumbled, "I know. Also, your grandmother wasn't well last time. You have school, and I was worried about her being home alone, so I found a caregiver for her. I've already interviewed them, and they'll be coming over in a couple of days." This was something Vivian hadn't thought of. Her grandmother's health had been good, but it had indeed weakened after her last surgery. She had school and couldn't take care of her grandmother full-time, a fact she had forgotten. She hadn't expected Julian to be so thorough. Since it concerned her grandmother's health, even though Vivian wanted to draw a line between them, she knew he was doing the right thing and that she shouldn't object. After a moment, she said, "I'll pay you back for the caregiver's expenses." Julian frowned, then suddenly remembered she used to have a notebook where she meticulously recorded how much she would owe him in the future. He had told her it was unnecessary back then, but he hadn't expected her to still be doing it. The car had slowly driven onto the Rongcheng University campus. Julian stopped in a quiet spot. "Vivi, I've told you, you don't need to draw such a clear line between us." Vivian shook her head. Paying him back was something she had decided on long ago and had never given up on. Before, she wanted to clear her debts to stand before him as an equal and tell him she liked him. Now, it was to no longer be indebted to him. She was as persistent as ever. "I will pay you back." Julian sighed, at a loss as to how to persuade the stubborn girl before him. Vivian had already reached for the door handle to get out, but after pulling it a couple of times without it opening, she finally spoke to him. "Uncle Julian, I'm leaving now." Julian still didn't unlock the door. He only said, "Take my number out of your block list." So he was still thinking about that. At first, Vivian refused, but seeing that he was prepared to keep them both in the car until she unblocked him, she finally relented. She silently took out her phone and removed his number from the block list. Then she held the phone out to him. "There, happy?" Julian nodded. Seeing her angry face, he couldn't help but explain, "It's not that I want to bother you. I'm just afraid I won't be able to find you if you get into trouble, or you won't be able to find me. The last 2 car accidents were enough to scare me for a lifetime." Vivian glanced up and happened to see his deep eyes staring at her in the rearview mirror. Her ears turned red. "I won't get into trouble. Stop jinxing it." She then tried the door again. This time, it was unlocked. She hurried out of the car and ran into the school. What Vivian didn't expect was that Julian's words were indeed a jinx. He had just said she'd get into trouble, and the very next day, she did. It was just an accident, really. That day, Vivian was coming out of the library and happened to see someone confessing their love. A crowd had gathered to watch the spectacle. She never liked joining in on such things and was about to leave, but the girl being confessed to rejected the boy. The boy, feeling he had lost face in public, refused to let her go. His friends also came over and started pulling at the girl. The girl, of course, had her own friends. The 2 groups started pulling and shoving, and the crowd got tangled up, pulling Vivian, who was trying to leave, into the mess. In the end, in the chaos, someone accidentally pushed Vivian. She fell down the long flight of stairs at the library entrance. The injuries weren't severe, but she had aggravated the old injuries from her accident. When the crowd saw blood seeping through her pants, they were scared to death, and a whole procession immediately took her to the infirmary. The wound on her leg had split open, and Vivian could barely move. When Julian arrived, she was lying alone in her dorm room, staring blankly. She had no idea how he had managed to get into the girls' dormitory without being kicked out. She only came back to her senses when Julian's arms scooped her up horizontally. "What are you doing?" She tried to struggle, but with one leg in a cast, she couldn't move. Julian didn't answer. He just carried her out brazenly. Many students were staring at her. Vivian's face turned beet red with shame, and she finally buried her face in his chest, not daring to look up. Downstairs, Julian gently placed her in the car and was about to drive off. "Where on earth are you taking me?" His voice was deep. "I'm taking you somewhere else to live. Your leg is injured. Who's going to take care of you if you're alone in the dorm?" Vivian immediately refused. "No, Julian turned to stare at her. "I told you to take good care of yourself. If you can't, then I will." Without waiting for her response, he stepped on the gas and drove away. He was, after all, very thoughtful. Knowing that Vivian would feel uncomfortable if he took her directly to the Forster mansion, he took her to another apartment he owned. Vivian had stayed here before. It was close to her high school, and she had often come to this apartment to rest during those years. Seeing the familiar apartment, Vivian's initially resistant mood suddenly calmed. The place was exactly as it had been when she stayed here in high school. Even the stuffed doll on the sofa was the one she and Julian had won at an arcade. Julian helped her inside and sat her down in the living room. He then knelt to check the injury on her leg, his thick brows furrowed. "It's only been a short while and you're injured again?" Vivian probably felt guilty as her eyes darted away, not looking at him. It wasn't on purpose. It was just an accident. Julian shook his head, probably regretting not being by her side every moment. "What do you want to eat? I'll make it for you." Hearing him say that, Vivian's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, she couldn't even react. Julian cooking for her? I must be hearing things. It was only when Julian reached out and ruffled her hair again, asking gently, "Why aren't you saying anything? No appetite," that she came back to reality. She bit her lip. "Anything is fine." "Okay." He took a blanket and draped it over Vivian, then walked into the kitchen. Julian knew his way around a kitchen, but he was by no means an expert. 20 minutes later, he came out with 2 bowls of steaming hot noodles. His own bowl was ordinary, but Vivian's was so piled with beef that you could barely see the noodles, and it was garnished with a few pieces of bright green vegetables. Just the smell alone was fragrant. Vivian suddenly remembered that this wasn't the first time she had eaten noodles made by Julian. In her 3rd year of middle school, the pressure of high school entrance exams had made her lose her appetite and sleep. Once, she had fainted from hunger at home. That time, Julian had also made her a bowl of noodles. That time, Vivian had cried as she ate. Growing up, besides her grandmother, no one had ever cared if she had eaten. And Julian had just barged into her world and given her the care she craved most. Thinking of the past, a bittersweet feeling rose in her heart. She lowered her head to suppress it and sat down quietly to eat her noodles. Sometimes, Vivian hated herself. She had clearly decided not to get entangled with him again, yet she was still caught up with him. Such a simple bowl of noodles, and it made her remember his kindness again. So pathetic. She also hated Julian. Why couldn't he have been kinder to her before? Why did he have to wait until she had already given up all hope before he regretted it? The more she thought, the more her heart ached. Vivian forced herself not to think about anything else and just focused on eating her noodles. "Slow down, be careful, it's hot," Julian reminded her gently. Vivian didn't answer, keeping her head down and eating quietly. After they finished eating, Julian took care of the dishes. Vivian remained silent the whole time. When he finished washing the dishes, he showed no signs of leaving. She sat on the living room sofa, pretending to play on her phone for a long time before finally asking, "Why aren't you going home yet?" Julian was at his laptop, dealing with work. He looked up at her words. "This is my home too." What did he mean by that? Julian quickly explained. "You can't move around easily. I'll be staying here to take care of you for a while." Did that mean they would be living under the same roof? But this was, after all, Julian's apartment. She had no reason to kick him out. She bit her lip and said nothing. A little while later, the doorbell rang. Julian went to get it, and his assistant was standing at the door. "Mr. Forster, the crutches and the custom-made wheelchair you ordered have arrived." Sitting on the sofa, Vivian overheard the assistant. She couldn't believe he had even had a wheelchair custom made for her. She was just injured. He was making it sound like she was disabled. The assistant pushed the brand new wheelchair over to Vivian. "Miss Vivi, would you like to see if it fits?" Vivian felt it would be rude to refuse, so she nodded. The assistant was about to help her up when he felt a death glare on him and immediately stopped. Then Julian came over and helped her into the wheelchair. "Does it fit?" How could it not fit? Vivian felt he was making a mountain out of a molehill. "It's fine." The assistant's task was complete, and he left. The room was once again just the two of them. Julian instructed her, "If you don't want to walk, use the wheelchair. Don't push yourself, you hear?" "I know." And so they temporarily lived together. Vivian had thought it would be awkward, but it was actually all right. Julian was busy with work, but to keep an eye on Vivian, he brought most of his work home. He often stayed in the study and even installed a call bell, telling her to press it if she needed anything. Vivian, of course, rarely pressed it, so they didn't actually see each other much. Usually, Julian would be busy working, and when he realized he hadn't heard from her in a while, he would go to check on her, find her quietly reading a book, and then silently leave. Life was quiet and harmonious, but the one thing that made Vivian awkward was the issue of bathing. The weather was still quite cold, and her injury made it inconvenient, so she didn't shower every day. But she still needed to wash. However, this was something she was 100% unwilling to let Julian help with. One evening, after finally being unable to stand it any longer, she hobbled into the bathroom on her crutches. 5 minutes later, a sharp scream came from the bathroom. Julian rushed into her room almost instantly. Seeing it was empty, he noticed the light was on in the bathroom. He asked anxiously, "What's wrong?" Vivian's voice was small and weak. "Nothing. I was about to wash up and I accidentally slipped." Hearing that she had fallen, Julian was about to rush in, but Vivian stopped him in embarrassment. "Don't come in. I can get up by myself." She had already taken off her clothes. How could she possibly let Julian in? Julian didn't senselessly barge in, but he didn't leave either. He stood quietly in the room, afraid she would have another accident. A few minutes later, the bathroom door opened a crack. Vivian spoke, utterly embarrassed. "Uncle Julian, could you please hand me my pajamas?" Even without seeing her face, Julian could guess how embarrassed she must be. He raised an eyebrow, saw the neatly folded pink pajamas on the headboard, and walked over to get them for her. The crack in the bathroom door widened slightly. Vivian quickly snatched the pajamas from his hand and then struggled to put them on by herself. When she came out, her face was still flushed. She saw that Julian hadn't left, and thinking of the earlier embarrassment, she lowered her head, planning to play dead. But in her haste to get away, her injured leg couldn't keep up. As she passed by him, she slipped and almost fell again. Careful, Julian quickly caught her, and they were suddenly pressed extremely close. So close that Vivian could hear his breathing. She instinctively looked up, only to find him staring right back at her. His dark, inky eyes swirled with emotions she couldn't understand. He didn't let go, his gaze fixed on her like a laser. His handsome face grew larger and larger in her vision, their lips almost touching. Only then did Vivian finally snap out of her trance, straightening up and suddenly pushing him away. Her heart was still pounding. She silently chastised herself for almost succumbing again. "Uncle Julian, I want to rest now." Julian just watched her quietly, as if he hadn't yet pulled himself out of the intimate atmosphere from moments before. After a long pause, he finally left the room, leaving Vivian alone on the bed, scratching her head in regret. Pathetic, so pathetic. "Vivian, did you waver again just now?" But it was undeniable that after that day, the atmosphere between them changed again. Vivian found it harder and harder to look him in the eye and was always avoiding him. She felt she was losing sight of her own heart, until one time she woke up from a nap. She had intended to go out for a glass of water, but accidentally overheard Julian on the phone outside. He didn't sound very happy. "Brother, I will handle my own marriage. You and our other brother don't need to worry about it." Hearing the word marriage, Vivian's heart suddenly trembled and her hand on the doorknob tightened. I didn't go to meet Director Wren's granddaughter, and you don't need to be angry. I told you a long time ago I will not agree to an arranged marriage. I have my own plans. His tone was firm, leaving no room for negotiation. The person on the other end was probably furious and finally hung up. Julian stood there for a long time, and finally, Vivian heard him let out a soft sigh. She didn't leave her room for the rest of that day. That night, Vivian lay in bed, unable to sleep. Thinking about what he had said on the phone, she tossed and turned, unable to forget it. Marriage, arranged marriage, and that Director Wren's granddaughter. So, without her knowing, the Forster family had already arranged a marriage for him. But he said he didn't go to meet her. Even if she wasn't being narcissistic, she knew why he had refused the family's arrangement. Her mind was a mess. Vivian felt that she had, uncharacteristically, wavered for a second. She thought about it all night and finally made a major decision. The next day, she took the rare initiative to speak to Julian, but after hearing what she had to say, Julian's brow furrowed so tightly he could have crushed a fly. You want to study abroad? Vivian nodded seriously. No, I don't agree. He refused instantly, then added, Am I putting too much pressure on you? Vivi, I'm not trying to force you, you don't have to. That's not it, she interrupted. Uncle Julian, I just want to go somewhere else to think properly. I admit, my feelings for you are complicated. I used to really like you, and then I really swore I would never like you again. But then you suddenly said you like me, and I don't know what to do. I'm not sure if I can still like you the way I used to, or even if we're suitable for each other. I want to go somewhere far away, so we can both calm down and think things through. Maybe after I graduate, all these questions will have answers. Julian looked at her earnest expression. But what if your answer is that you don't want to be with me? Vivian froze, not answering. But soon, Julian hugged her again. I can agree. I'll give you time to think. But Vivi, you have to promise me too. Whatever your answer is, you have to come back and tell me in person, okay? Vivian looked at him, finally understanding that he was worried she would leave and never come back. She couldn't help but smile. What are you thinking? Grandma is still in Rongcheng. How could I not come back? The school offered me the exchange student program a month ago. I've been considering it and discussed it with Grandma. She's very supportive of me studying abroad. Julian breathed a sigh of relief, knowing she wasn't running away to avoid him, but his heart was still reluctant. However, since Vivian had finally softened her stance on their relationship, he could only agree. Vivi, I will wait for you to come back. Hearing his solemn whisper, Vivian's heart suddenly softened. A week later, her leg had healed, and her study abroad procedures were complete. The day she left, Julian personally saw her off at the airport. Neither of them said much, but Julian's gaze never left her. Before they parted, he finally couldn't resist pulling her into another embrace. Vivian's nose tingled, but she still said, Uncle Julian, if you find someone suitable in these few years, you can be with her. I'll wish you well. Julian said, I will wait for you. Whether it's 1 year or 2, whatever your answer is, I will wait for you to come back. He watched Vivian go to her boarding gate until her figure was no longer visible, then finally left the airport. Vivian was gone for 3 years. They saw each other only a handful of times. One was busy with work, the other with studies, and with the great distance between them, they contacted each other less and less. It seemed as if they might just fade out of each other's worlds. But Julian remained single, with no other women by his side. He rejected the arranged marriages the Forster family set up for him time and time again. Sometimes, Leo would see his uncle all alone and couldn't help but try to persuade him. Once, Leo asked, Uncle, if she doesn't come back, are you really going to wait forever? Julian's answer was certain. She will come back. Even though they hadn't seen or spoken to each other in a long time, Julian was still so sure. 3 years later, in October, the airport was bustling with holiday travelers. A woman in a black dress pushed a suitcase out of the arrival's gate. The 3 years had left no trace on her face, but had shed her former youthful innocence, making her even more beautiful and captivating. Amidst the crowd, she spotted the most dazzling presence almost at a glance. Julian stood there in a black suit, as if he had seen her long ago. They walked towards each other, step by step. Vivian's eyes inexplicably turned red. How did you know I was coming back today? Julian looked at her quietly. In truth, he knew all her news over the past 3 years, but he never disturbed her. He had said he would let her think, and he didn't want to interfere. Julian raised his hand and, just like before, stroked her head. "Vivi, the question from 3 years ago, do you have an answer now?" The man before her was even more composed than before, yet she could hear a hint of nervousness in his question. She suddenly broke into a tearful smile. The moment she graduated, she couldn't wait to come home. Even though she told herself it was just because she was homesick and missed her grandmother, no matter how she tried to hide it, the suppressed longing burst forth the second she saw him. The question that had troubled her for so long had, in fact, been answered long ago. This time, she took the initiative to reach out and embrace him. "Uncle Julian, I like you. This is my answer. No matter how much time has passed, I still only like you."